Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Life. Robert Mitchell had built his empire with calloused hands and an iron will. At 45, he owned the largest construction company in the tri-state area, Mitchell & Sons, employing over 300 workers. His reputation was legendary, fair but ruthless, loyal to those who earned it, and merciless to those who crossed him. Rob had clawed his way up from nothing, working 16-hour days since he was 16, sleeping in his truck between jobs when he couldn't afford rent. The two-story colonial house in Westfield represented everything he'd fought for. Linda, his wife of 18 years, had transformed it into something from a magazine spread. Their son Danny, now 15, had everything Rob never had: private school, college fund, a future handed to him on a silver platter. Rob stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror that Tuesday morning, noting the gray threading through his dark hair. The scars on his knuckles told stories of bar fights and construction accident from his younger days. He'd married Linda when she was 22 and he was 27, a beautiful waitress with dreams bigger than her small hometown could contain. He'd given her those dreams, shaped them into reality with his bare hands. "Coffee's ready," Linda called from downstairs, her voice carrying that warm tone that had first captured his heart at Murphy's Diner all those years ago. Rob found her in the kitchen, still stunning at 40. Her auburn hair caught the morning light, and she wore the silk robe he'd bought her for their anniversary. She smiled, that same smile that had made him believe a roughneck like him could deserve something beautiful. "Early meeting today?" she asked, pouring coffee into his thermos. "Site inspection at the Riverside project. Foundation pour tomorrow if the weather holds." Rob kissed her cheek, breathing in her familiar perfume. "Danny's still asleep? You know teenagers. I'll drive him to school when he surfaces." Rob grabbed his hard hat from the counter. "Dinner at 7? Always." Linda's smile flickered for just a moment, so brief Rob almost missed it. He'd been missing a lot lately, he realized. Late nights at the office, weekend site visits, conference calls that stretched past midnight. Building an empire demanded sacrifice, but lately, he wondered if he'd sacrificed too much. The Riverside project was his masterpiece, a luxury residential complex that would cement Mitchell & Sons' reputation for decades. Every detail mattered. Every decision carried weight. As Rob walked the construction site, pointing out adjustments to his foreman, he felt the familiar satisfaction of creation, of building something permanent in a world full of temporary things. His phone buzzed with a text from Linda. "Having lunch with Cheryl today. Home by 4. Love you." Cheryl Brennan, Linda's college friend who'd moved to town 6 months ago. Recently divorced, always dramatic, the type who seemed to collect other people's problems. Rob had never warmed to her, but Linda needed friends. Being married to a man who worked 70 hours a week couldn't be easy. That evening, Rob arrived home to find Linda humming in the kitchen, preparing his favorite meal, beef stew with fresh bread. She seemed unusually cheerful, almost glowing. "Good day," he asked, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "Wonderful. Cheryl and I went to that new spa downtown. Very relaxing." Linda leaned into him, but something felt different. Her posture was too perfect, her voice too bright. Danny appeared in the doorway, earbuds dangling around his neck. "Hey, Dad. How was work?" "Same as always, son." "How was school?" "Fine." Danny's response was clipped, and he avoided eye contact. Teenage attitude, Rob assumed, though something nagged at him. They ate dinner in relative quiet, Linda chattering about her day while Danny pushed food around his plate. Rob watched his family, noting subtle changes he couldn't quite identify. The way Linda's laugh sounded forced. How Danny kept glancing at his phone. Small things that probably meant nothing. After dinner, Rob retreated to his home office to review blueprints for the next day's pour. Construction was predictable. Follow the plans, use quality materials, maintain safety standards, and everything turned out solid. Unlike people, buildings didn't lie or change their nature overnight. Around 11, Rob headed upstairs to find Linda already in bed, reading one of her romance novels. She looked up as he entered, and for a moment, he saw something in her eyes. Guilt? Fear? Then she smiled, and he decided he was imagining things. Long day, she said, marking her place in the book. They're all long days. Rob sat on the bed's edge, removing his work boots. But worth it, are they? Linda's question caught him off guard. Rob studied her face. What do you mean? Nothing. Just, sometimes I wonder if you're happy, Rob. Really happy. It was an odd question from a woman who lived in a house he'd bought, drove a car he'd paid for, wore jewelry he'd worked overtime to afford. But Rob had learned that women thought differently about such things. I'm happy when my family's safe and provided for. When I know you and Danny have everything you need. Linda nodded, but her smile seemed sad. I know you work hard for us. I hope you know how much that means to me. The conversation felt weighted with subtext he couldn't decipher. Rob kissed her goodnight and settled into bed, but sleep came slowly. Something was shifting in his perfect life, like the first crack in a foundation that seemed solid but was slowly giving way to hidden pressures. In the darkness, Linda lay beside him, her breathing too careful to be genuine sleep. Rob stared at the ceiling, his instincts, honed by years of managing difficult people and complex projects, telling him that change was coming. And in his experience, change usually meant trouble. Chapter 2: Shadows and Secrets. Trevor Kane had always been good at reading people. It's what made him successful in sales, and it's what had drawn Linda Mitchell to him like a moth to flame. At 38, Trevor possessed the kind of easy charm that opened doors and loosened purse strings. His silver tongue had sold everything from used cars to timeshares, but his greatest sale had been convincing Linda that she deserved better than a husband who treated her like another piece of property. Trevor's apartment overlooked the harbor, a modest place that he'd furnished with rental furniture and fake artwork. Everything in his life was temporary, disposable, including the women who passed through it. But Linda was different. She represented something permanent, something valuable. She represented Robert Mitchell's money. He suspects something, Linda said, pacing Trevor's living room in the pale afternoon light. She'd been agitated all week, jumping at shadows, checking her phone obsessively. Rob's not stupid, baby, but he's predictable. Trevor pulled her close, feeling the tension in her shoulders. 15 years of the same routine, same priorities. Work, work, work. He doesn't see what's right in front of him. Linda had first walked into his car dealership 8 months ago, claiming she wanted to surprise Rob with a new truck for his birthday. Trevor had seen through that lie immediately. She was shopping for attention, not vehicles. The expensive clothes couldn't hide the loneliness in her eyes, the way she lit up when someone actually listened to her talk. It had taken 3 coffee dates before she'd kissed him. 2 weeks before she'd come to his apartment. A month before she'd started talking about how empty her marriage had become, how Rob worked all the time and barely seemed to notice she existed. I gave him the best years of my life, she'd whispered in Trevor's bed one afternoon. I was 22 when we met. I had dreams, plans, but Rob needed a wife who'd stay home, look pretty, and never ask for anything more. Trevor had listened and sympathized and slowly planted the seeds of an idea. Linda wasn't just unhappy. She was entitled to compensation for all those lost years. Rob Mitchell was worth millions, and Linda deserved her share. Divorce would be messy, expensive, and Rob would fight it with the same ruthless efficiency he brought to his business. But there were other ways to get what she deserved. Tell me about your day again, Trevor said, guiding Linda to the couch. Every detail. I had lunch with Cheryl like we planned. She took pictures of us at the restaurant, made sure to get timestamps on everything. Then we went to the spa. More pictures, more alibis. I was home by 4, just like I texted Rob. And Danny. Linda's face tightened. He's been quiet lately. Moody. But that's normal for his age, right? Trevor had been watching Danny Mitchell for weeks, studying the boy's patterns, his vulnerabilities. 15-year-olds were easily manipulated if you knew which buttons to push. Danny was angry at his father's absence, resentful of being ignored, desperate for attention. Trevor had been giving him that attention, slowly building trust. Kids pick up on tension, Trevor said carefully. Maybe he senses things aren't right at home. The plan had taken months to develop. Trevor had learned patience in his years of long-con sales tactics. Rob Mitchell was too smart and too careful to fall for anything obvious. But every man had blind spots, and Rob's was his absolute faith in his family. He'd built walls around his business empire, but left his home completely undefended. Phase 1 had been reconnaissance. Trevor had befriended Cheryl Brennan at a bar downtown, discovering she'd been Linda's college roommate. A few expensive dinners and some carefully applied charm had convinced Cheryl to reconnect with her old friend. Cheryl became Trevor's inside source, reporting on Linda's marriage, Rob's schedule, the family's routines. Phase 2 was seduction. Not just Linda, that had been easy, but the entire family structure. Trevor had positioned himself as Linda's confidant, the understanding friend who listened to her problems. Through Cheryl, he'd learned about Danny's struggles at school, his resentment toward his father. Trevor had orchestrated chance meetings with the boy, gradually building a relationship. Phase 3 was the setup. Rob Mitchell's reputation for ruthless business dealings made him enemies. His construction company had contracts with questionable partners, employed workers who'd been in trouble with the law. Trevor had spent weeks cultivating these connections, learning which men held grudges against Rob, which ones could be bought or threatened into cooperation. The video is perfect, Trevor assured Linda. Professional quality, perfect lighting, clear audio. Rob's face is unmistakable. Linda shuddered. I still can't believe you convinced me to help film that. What if someone finds out? Nobody will find out. The location is completely untraceable, and we destroyed all the equipment afterward. As far as anyone knows, Rob committed a felony, and you just happened to discover it. The video had been Trevor's masterstroke. Using deepfake technology and careful staging, they'd created footage showing Rob Mitchell engaged in something that would destroy his reputation and send him to prison. The technical details had cost Trevor $30,000, money he'd borrowed from very dangerous people. But the investment would pay dividends. Once we confront him with the evidence, he'll have no choice, Trevor continued. Prison or cooperation. He'll sign over power of attorney to you, transfer assets, liquidate investments. We'll be gone before he realizes what happened. Linda pulled away from him. What about Danny? I can't just abandon my son. This was the weak point in Linda's resolve, the maternal instinct that complicated everything. Trevor had prepared for this objection. Danny's 15. In 3 years, he'll be 18 and completely independent. Do you want him to remember his mother as the woman who stayed trapped in a loveless marriage, or the woman who was brave enough to take control of her life? It was manipulation, pure and simple, but Linda needed to believe she was the victim in this scenario. Trevor had learned that people could justify anything if you gave them the right narrative. Besides, Trevor added, once we're established somewhere else, Danny can visit. Maybe even come live with us when he's older. Linda nodded, but Trevor could see the doubt in her eyes. He'd have to be careful. If she wavered now, if maternal guilt overcame her greed, the entire plan would collapse. And Trevor owed too much money to too many dangerous people to walk away empty-handed. That evening, as Linda drove home to her perfect house and her unsuspecting husband, Trevor made a phone call. It's happening tomorrow night, he told the voice on the other end. Make sure Danny's ready to play his part. The voice confirmed understanding and hung up. Trevor poured himself a scotch and stood at his window, looking out at the harbor lights. By this time next week, he'd be on a beach somewhere warm, drinking better scotch and planning his next score. Rob Mitchell's empire would crumble. Linda would have her freedom and fortune, and Trevor would disappear into the sunset. The only question was whether Linda would stick to the plan when the moment came. Trevor had learned that people's true nature emerged under pressure. Tomorrow night, he'd discover whether Linda Mitchell was as ruthless as she needed to be, or if her maternal instincts would prove to be everyone's downfall. Chapter 3. The Trap Springs. The garage door rumbled shut behind Rob as he pulled into his driveway at 11:30 p.m. The foundation pour had run late. A concrete truck had broken down, forcing them to source replacement material and work into the night. His clothes smelled of diesel and cement dust. His back ached from hours of supervision, but the job was done right. The house was dark except for a single light in the kitchen. Linda would be asleep, and Danny would be in his room with his headphones on, lost in whatever teenagers did on their phones until all hours. Rob grabbed his thermos and hard hat from the passenger seat, looking forward to a hot shower and his own bed. The kitchen light illuminated a note on the counter. Went to bed early. Headache. Love L. Rob frowned. Linda rarely got headaches, and she usually waited up for him no matter how late he worked. Another small thing, another deviation from the pattern he'd known for 18 years. His instincts prickled again, that same feeling he'd had when a subcontractor tried to slip substandard materials past his inspection. He was halfway up the stairs when he heard it, the sound of muffled crying coming from the garage. Rob backtracked quietly, his construction boots silent on the carpeted steps. Through the window, he could see light filtering under the garage door. Danny was out there, and from the sound of it, the boy was in serious distress. Rob slipped through the kitchen and opened the door connecting the house to the garage. Danny sat on a storage crate, his face illuminated by the glow of his phone screen. Tears streaked his cheeks, and his whole body shook with suppressed sobs. Danny, Rob stepped into the garage, closing the door behind him. Son, what's wrong? Danny looked up, and Rob saw something in his son's eyes he'd never seen before, fear. Raw, primal terror that made Rob's protective instincts surge. Dad, Danny's voice cracked. Dad, Mom told me to give you this. Danny's hands trembled as he held out the phone. On the screen, a video was playing. Rob took the device, squinting at the image, and felt his blood turn to ice. The video showed Rob Mitchell, unmistakably him, in what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse. He was standing over a young woman who was bound and crying, holding what looked like a metal pipe. The camera angle captured his face clearly as he raised the weapon. Son, I never did that. Rob's voice came out strangled. The video was impossible, insane. He'd never been in that warehouse, never hurt anyone, never. Danny backed away from him, terror transforming his features. Dad, look at the date on the video. Rob's hand shook as he checked the timestamp. Yesterday. The video was dated yesterday, during the hours he'd supposedly been at the Riverside site, surrounded by workers who could vouch for his presence. Danny, this is fake. This is impossible. I was at work yesterday, you know that. I was. Dad, please. Danny's voice broke completely. Please don't hurt me. The words hit Rob like a physical blow. His own son, afraid of him, believing he was capable of. Surprise. Rob spun toward the voice. Linda stood in the doorway, but this wasn't the woman who'd made him coffee that morning. Her smile was cold, predatory, nothing like the warm expression he'd fallen in love with 19 years ago. Daddy's going to jail, Linda continued, her voice sing-song, almost playful. Unless what? Rob's mind raced, trying to process what was happening. The video was fake, it had to be. But the technology, the quality, the timestamp. Unless you do exactly what I tell you to do. Linda stepped fully into the garage, and Rob noticed she was dressed differently than when he'd left that morning. Black clothes, gloves, like she was preparing for something. Linda, what the hell is this? What's going on? What's going on, Rob? Is that you're finally going to pay for 18 years of neglect. 18 years of treating me like a pretty decoration while you built your little empire. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The strange behavior, the fake alibis, the way Danny had been avoiding him. How long have you been planning this? Long enough. A new voice entered the conversation. A man stepped out from behind Rob's workbench, tall, well-dressed, with the kind of practiced smile Rob had seen on 1,000 salesmen. Rob Mitchell, the man said, extending his hand with mock politeness. Trevor Kane, I've heard so much about you. Rob ignored the offered handshake. You're the one behind this. Behind what? I'm just Linda's friend. The friend who's been listening to her for months while you ignored her. The friend who's been giving Danny the attention his father had never bothered with. You son of a... Rob started toward Trevor, but Linda's voice stopped him. I wouldn't do that, Rob. Not with Danny watching. Not when that video is already uploaded to a secure server. ready to be sent to the police with a single text message. Rob looked at his son, who was pressed against a garage wall, phone clutched to his chest like a shield. "Danny, you don't believe this. You know I would never. I don't know anything anymore." Danny shouted. "You're never here. You don't talk to me. You don't care about anything except work and money and—" Danny's voice broke again. "Trevor's been more of a father to me these past few months than you ever were." The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. Rob had worked 16-hour days for this boy, had built an empire to secure his future, had sacrificed everything to give him opportunities Rob had never had. And Danny had chosen a stranger over his own father. "Here's how this works," Trevor said, his voice businesslike. "You're going to sign some documents, transfer certain assets, liquidate some investments, and in return, that video never sees the light of day. And if I refuse?" Linda's smile widened. "Then you'll be in prison within 24 hours, facing charges that will destroy everything you've built. Your company, your reputation, your freedom. Everything." Rob looked around the garage, at his tools, his workbench, the space where he'd taught Danny to change oil and check tire pressure. Memories of better times, when his family had seemed solid and permanent. "You miscalculated," Rob said quietly. "Excuse me." Trevor's confidence wavered slightly. "You think you know me. You think you understand what kind of man I am." Rob's voice was calm, controlled, but something had shifted in his posture. "You see a businessman who'll negotiate when cornered. A family man who'll do anything to protect his reputation." Linda and Trevor exchanged glances. Danny pressed further against the wall. "You're wrong," Rob continued. "I'm not a businessman who happens to work construction. I'm a construction worker who learned business. I'm the kind of man who fought for everything he has, who broke bones and shed blood to build something from nothing." "Dad!" Danny's voice was small, uncertain. "And you," Rob looked directly at his son, "chose them over me. Your own father." "Rob, don't be dramatic," Linda said, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. "Just sign the papers, and—" "I built this life with my hands," Rob interrupted. "And if it burns down, I'll rebuild it the same way. But first—" Rob's smile was nothing like the warm expression his family knew. It was the smile of a man who'd grown up in rough neighborhoods, who'd settled disputes with fists before he'd learned to settle them with lawyers. "First, you're all going to learn what happens when you threaten Robert Mitchell." Trevor stepped forward, pulling out his phone. "One text message, old man. One text, and your life is over." "Send it," Rob said. "But understand something. When that video goes public, I'll have nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous thing in the world." The temperature in the garage seemed to drop 10 degrees. Danny whimpered softly, finally understanding that his father wasn't the broken man they'd expected to find. Linda's hand moved toward Trevor's arm, a warning gesture. But Trevor was too arrogant, too invested in his plan to recognize the shift in power dynamics. His finger hovered over his phone screen, ready to destroy Rob Mitchell's life. He had no idea that Rob Mitchell was about to destroy his. Chapter 4. The Hunter Becomes Prey. Rob stood motionless for 3 heartbeats, his mind shifting into the calculating mode that had built his empire. Every successful construction project began with assessment. Understanding the foundation, identifying weak points, determining which structures could bear weight and which would crumble under pressure. "Send the video," Rob repeated, his voice steady. "I'm curious to see how far you've thought this through." Trevor's finger hesitated over the phone screen. Something in Rob's tone had clearly unsettled him. "You're bluffing. You have too much to lose." "Do I?" Rob took a step closer, and Trevor instinctively backed up. "Let's examine what I actually lose. My reputation? Built it once, I can build it again. My company? I know every competitor in the tri-state area, every foreman worth hiring, every client worth keeping. My money." Rob glanced at Linda. "Half of it goes to my cheating wife anyway." Linda's face had gone pale. "Rob, you're not thinking clearly. The charges alone will." "Will what?" "Stick." Rob laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "You think I survived 30 years in construction without learning how to spot a setup? That video is impressive work. Probably cost you serious money. But you made one critical error. Trevor's confidence was cracking. What error? You assumed I'm the same man I was 18 years ago. The man who worked alone, who had no connections, no resources beyond his own two hands. Rob pulled out his own phone, speed dialing a number. You forgot that I'm Robert Mitchell now. The call connected immediately. Rob? Jesus, it's almost midnight. What's? Pete, I need you to listen carefully. Someone just showed me a deep fake video of me committing a felony. Very high quality, professional work. I need to know who in the tri-state area has the equipment and expertise to produce something like that. Detective Pete Romano had been Rob's friend since childhood, back when they'd both been scrapping in the same tough neighborhood. Pete had chosen law enforcement. Rob had chosen construction. But they'd maintained their friendship through 3 decades, bound by shared history and mutual respect. Deepfake? Rob, what the hell have you gotten yourself into? I'll explain later. Right now I need that information. Give me an hour. And Rob, don't do anything stupid until I call you back. Rob ended the call and looked at Trevor, whose face had gone ashen. You see, the beauty of building a successful business is that you collect resources. Contacts. People who owe you favors. People who trust you. You can't prove anything, Trevor said, but his voice lacked conviction. Can't I? Rob smiled. Pete Romano is one of the best detectives in the state. He'll trace that video back to its source within hours. Professional deepfake work requires serious equipment, and there are only a handful of operators in this region. Rob began pacing the garage, his movements predatory. But that's just the beginning. See, once Pete confirms this is fraud, I'll have ground for a lawsuit. Conspiracy, extortion, alienation of affection, intentional infliction of emotional distress. My lawyers will tear through your lives like a tornado. Linda found her voice. Rob, please. We can work this out. We can. Work what out? Rob's gaze fixed on her with surgical precision. 18 years of marriage, and you plan to destroy me over what? Money? Freedom? Or just the thrill of betraying everything we built together? You don't understand what it's been like. Linda's voice rose. Being married to someone who cares more about concrete and steel than. Stop. The single word cut through her protest like a blade. Don't you dare make this about my work. Everything I built, every hour I worked, every sacrifice I made was for this family. For you. For him. Rob's eyes found Danny, who was still pressed against the wall. And you both chose a stranger over me. Trevor was frantically typing on his phone. Rob could see the panic in his movements, the desperate attempt to salvage a plan that was disintegrating by the minute. Were you texting? Rob asked. Your technical support? Your financial backers? Or maybe the dangerous people you borrowed money from to finance this operation? Trevor's head snapped up. How did you know about your debts? Your desperate situation? Your history of long-con sales tactics? Rob's smile was razor sharp. You've been watching my family for months. Did you really think I wouldn't have you investigated the moment I realized something was wrong? The lie came easily, but it hit its target. Trevor's face went white as he processed the implications. That's right, Rob continued. I've known about you for weeks. About your apartment, your debts, your history of targeting wealthy women. About the people you owe money to, very dangerous people who don't accept excuses when payment comes due. Linda looked between Rob and Trevor, confusion and fear warring in her expression. Trevor, what is he talking about? What debts? Trevor's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen and visibly flinched. I need to take this. By all means, Rob gestured magnanimously. Don't let me interrupt your business. Trevor stepped toward the corner of the garage, turning his back to the group. His voice was low, urgent, but Rob caught fragments. Need more time? Complications? Payment coming. Rob used the distraction to move closer to Danny. His son was trembling, tears still streaking his face, looking younger than his 15 years. Danny, Rob said quietly. Look at me. The boy's eyes met his father's, and Rob saw the confusion there, the dawning realization that perhaps he'd misjudged the situation entirely. I need you to understand something, Rob continued. That man has been manipulating you, using your feelings against me to serve his own purposes. He doesn't care about you or your mother. You're just tools to him. But he said, he listened to me when you wouldn't. And what did he tell you to do? How did he convince you to betray your own father? Danny's face crumpled. He said you didn't really love us, that you only cared about work. He said if I helped him, you'd finally pay attention to me. The admission hit Rob like a physical blow. His son, desperate for attention, manipulated by a predator who'd identified his vulnerabilities and exploited them ruthlessly. Danny, Rob's voice was gentle now, the anger temporarily set aside. I've made mistakes. I've worked too much, been absent too often. But I love you more than my own life. Everything I've done has been to build something for you, to give you opportunities one never had. I know, Danny whispered. I know that now. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. Rob pulled his son into a fierce embrace, feeling the boy's shoulders shake with sobs. Over Danny's head, he watched Trevor finish his phone call. The man's face was grim, desperate. The walls were closing in from multiple directions. Linda stood frozen, watching her family reconcile while her own world crumbled around her. The confident woman who delivered ultimatums 15 minutes ago was gone, replaced by someone who was finally understanding the true scope of her mistake. The video is already uploaded, Trevor said, returning to the group. Even if we wanted to stop this now, who says we want to stop it? Rob released Danny, but kept one hand on his son's shoulder. You see, Trevor, you've been thinking like a small-time con artist. But I think bigger than that. Rob's phone rang. Pete Romano, calling back early. Rob, I found your deepfake artist. Guy named Morrison operates out of a warehouse in the industrial district. Expensive equipment, very skilled, but he's got a gambling problem. Word is he's been taking high-risk jobs to pay off debts. Thanks, Pete. I owe you. Rob, what are you planning? This sounds like justice, Rob said, and ended the call. Trevor's face had gone gray. The warehouse, the equipment, the operator, all the threads of his plan were unraveling in real time. Here's what's going to happen, Rob said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd commanded construction crews and boardrooms for decades. That video gets released, and the investigation begins immediately. Morrison talks to save his own skin. They always do. The money trail leads back to you, Trevor. The conspiracy charges, the extortion, the fraud, it all lands on your head. Linda's involved too, Trevor said desperately. She helped film it. She's part of... Is she? Rob's smile was arctic cold. Because from where I stand, it looks like my wife was manipulated by a predator who targeted her vulnerabilities just like he targeted my son's. A skilled prosecutor could paint her as another victim in your scheme. Linda stared at Rob in shock. After everything she'd done, he was offering her a way out. But that protection comes with conditions, Rob continued. Full cooperation, complete honesty about your involvement. And most importantly, Rob's gaze fixed on Linda with laser intensity. You disappear from my life forever. You sign whatever papers my lawyers put in front of you. You take nothing from this marriage except what I choose to give you, and you never contact me or Danny again. The garage fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic and Danny's quiet sniffling. 3 lives hung in the balance, waiting for decisions that would reshape everything. Trevor was the first to break. Linda, we need to talk. Privately. No, Rob said. Whatever you have to say, you say it here. No more secrets, no more schemes. Everything in the open from now on. The trap had been sprung, but not in the way any of them had expected. The hunter had become the prey, and Robert Mitchell was just getting started. Chapter 5. Dismantling the Enemy. Trevor Kane had spent his entire adult life reading people, identifying their pressure points, exploiting their weaknesses. But standing in Rob Mitchell's garage at midnight, watching his carefully constructed plan crumble, he finally understood what it felt like to be outmaneuvered by a superior opponent. Linda, Trevor's voice was tight with barely controlled panic. We need to stick to the plan. The video is already uploaded. The financial transfers are ready. All you need is her signature on documents that will make you rich while she goes to prison, Rob interrupted. Because that's what this was always about, wasn't it, Trevor? The money. Linda looked between the two men, her world tilting on its axis. Trevor? What is he talking about? Rob pulled out his phone again, this time opening a voice recording app. Tell her about the insurance policy, Trevor. The one where if this goes wrong, she takes the fall while you disappear with liquid assets. I don't know what you are. Tell her about the offshore accounts you've been setting up. The exit strategy that involves her facing federal charges while you sip cocktails on a beach somewhere. Rob's voice was calm, matter of fact. Tell her how you've been playing the long game. Not just on me, but on her too. The look on Linda's face was heartbreaking. The expression of someone watching their last refuge crumble. Trevor, is that true? Trevor's practiced charm finally abandoned him completely. Linda, you have to understand the risk management required. Risk management? Linda's voice rose to a shriek. You bastard. You were planning to abandon me. Like you planned to abandon your family, Rob observed quietly. Funny how betrayal travels in circles. Danny had been silent during this exchange, still pressed against his father's side, but now he spoke up. Mom, why did you do this? Why did you want to hurt Dad? Linda's attention shifted to her son, and Rob saw something break in her expression. Whatever anger had driven her to this point, whatever justification she'd built in her mind, they crumbled under her child's questioning gaze. I thought, Linda's voice faltered. I thought he didn't love us anymore. I thought he cared more about his work than his family. So you decided to destroy him, Danny said, and the condemnation in his young voice was absolute. You decided to send him to prison. Danny, you don't understand how complicated. I understand that you're my mother, and you try to destroy my father. Danny pulled away from Rob and faced Linda directly. Trevor told me it was just about getting Dad's attention, making him realize what he was losing. He never said anything about prison or destroying his life. Rob felt a surge of pride at his son's moral clarity, even as his heart broke for the boy's pain. To discover that one parent had been willing to sacrifice the other for personal gain. No child should have to process that kind of betrayal. Trevor was backing toward the garage door, clearly calculating his chances of escape. But Rob had anticipated this. I wouldn't, Rob said conversationally. Pete Romano has units positioned around the neighborhood. They've been there since I called him. It was another bluff, but Trevor couldn't know that. His shoulders sagged in defeat. Here's what's going to happen, Rob continued, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to giving orders that weren't questioned. Trevor, you're going to call Morrison and tell him to destroy all evidence of the video project. Then you're going to transfer any assets you've already moved back to their original accounts. I can't. The people I owe money to are going to be disappointed. That's what happens when you gamble with money you don't have. Rob's tone was unsympathetic. You chose to target my family to solve your problems. Now you get to face the consequences. Rob turned to Linda, and you're going to choose. Right now, in front of our son, you can cooperate fully, help me destroy every trace of this conspiracy, and walk away with enough money to start over somewhere else. Or you can stand by Trevor, face federal charges for extortion and fraud, and spend the next decade in prison. Linda looked at Trevor, searching his face for some sign that he had a solution, a backup plan, anything that would salvage this disaster. But Trevor's expression was that of a man watching his own execution. What about Danny? Linda asked finally. What about him? Rob's voice was ice cold. You made your choice when you decided to use him against me. You forfeited your right to maternal concern the moment you turned my son into a weapon. Dad, Danny said quietly. Can I talk to Mom? Alone. Rob hesitated. After everything that had happened, the idea of leaving Linda alone with Danny felt dangerous. But his son had been through enough trauma for one night. If this conversation would help him process what had happened, Rob could allow it. 5 minutes, Rob said. Trevor and I will step outside. Rob gestured for Trevor to precede him out of the garage. The night air was cool and clean, a sharp contrast to the suffocating atmosphere inside. Rob could hear Danny's voice through the thin walls, too low to make out words, but carrying the tone of someone working through profound disappointment. You really think you've won, Trevor said, leaning against Rob's truck. But this isn't over. There are people involved in this that you don't know about, people who won't just walk away because your plan fell apart. The people you owe money to? Rob studied Trevor's face in the dim streetlight. The ones who fronted you cash for the deepfake operation? Tell me about them. Trevor's laugh was bitter. You think you're tough because you built a construction company? These people break kneecaps for entertainment. They don't care about your reputation or your connections. They want their money, and they're going to get it one way or another. From me, you mean? Since your original plan failed. From someone. And Linda's still legally your wife, which makes her responsible for community debts. The threat was clear, and Rob felt his anger shift into something colder, more focused. It was one thing to target him directly. Threatening Linda, despite her betrayal, was another matter entirely. How much? Rob asked. 80 grand plus interest. They're not the patient type. Rob did quick calculations. 80,000 was significant, but manageable, especially if it eliminated an ongoing threat. But paying Trevor's debts felt like rewarding failure, encouraging future attacks. Here's a better idea, Rob said. You're going to make some phone calls. You're going to explain to these dangerous friends of yours that the job failed, the target proved too difficult, and they need to write off the loss. They don't write off losses. They collect them in blood. Not if you give them something better. Rob's smile was predatory. You see, Trevor, you're not the only one with dangerous connections. The difference is mine are legal. Rob pulled out his phone and showed Trevor a contact list that included judges, prosecutors, federal agents, and police commissioners. 30 years of successful business builds a lot of relationships. My lawyer plays golf with the district attorney. My accountant is married to a federal judge. My best friend from childhood runs the organized crime task force. Trevor's face went white as he processed the implications. So here's what you're going to do, Rob continued. You're going to convince your creditors that pursuing this debt would expose them to federal investigation. You're going to make them understand that Robert Mitchell is not a target. He's a trap. The garage door opened, and Danny emerged, his face streaked with tears, but his posture more settled. Linda followed, looking like a woman who'd just attended her own funeral. We talked, Danny said simply. I understand why she did it, but I can't forgive it. She's my mother, but she chose to hurt our family. That's not something I can just forget. Rob felt his heart break for his son's lost innocence. 15 years old, and already learning that the people you trust most can be the ones who hurt you deepest. Linda, Rob asked, what's your decision? Linda's voice was barely a whisper. I'll cooperate. I'll sign whatever you want to sign. Just, please don't completely destroy me. I know I don't deserve mercy, but you'll get what you deserve, Rob said. Nothing more, nothing less. He looked at Trevor, who was staring at his phone like it might explode. And you're going to start making those calls. Right now. Because every minute you delay makes this situation worse for everyone involved. Trevor nodded slowly, finally understanding that his only path to survival ran through Robert Mitchell's mercy. And mercy, Rob had learned that night, was a luxury he could no longer afford. The conspiracy was unraveling. The conspirators were broken. But Rob's real work was just beginning. Destroying his enemies had been the easy part. Rebuilding his family's trust, healing his son's wounds, and constructing a new life from the wreckage of the old one. That would require all the skills that had built his empire, and some he was only just beginning to discover. Chapter 6. The Price of Betrayal. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of lawyers, paperwork, and careful orchestration. Rob had transformed his home office into a war room, coordinating multiple simultaneous operations with the precision that had made Mitchell & Sons the most successful construction company in the region. Linda sat at the kitchen table, signing document after document under the watchful eye of Rob's attorney, Margaret Shun, a sharp woman in her 50s who specialized in high-stakes divorce proceedings. Each signature stripped away another piece of the life Linda had known, reducing 18 years of marriage to legal boilerplate and financial settlements. This transfers your interest in the Westfield property to your husband, Margaret explained, sliding another form across the table. You'll retain ownership of the downtown condo, the Lexus, and a settlement of $200,000. Linda's hand trembled as she signed. $200,000 sounded generous until you considered she was walking away from a marriage worth several million. But generosity wasn't the point. Control was. Rob was demonstrating that he held all the power now, that her cooperation was rewarded, but her betrayal came with consequences. Trevor had spent those same 48 hours making increasingly desperate phone calls. Rob could hear fragments of conversation through the thin walls of the guest room where Trevor was confined. Explanations, pleas, promises that sounded less convincing with each iteration. The Kozlov organization isn't known for patience. Detective Pete Romano had explained when Rob called for background on Trevor's creditors. Russian mob, mostly loan sharking and protection rackets. They've got legitimate business fronts, but their collection methods are definitely old school. How old school? Hospital old school. Sometimes morgue old school. Rob had factored this information into his planning. The Kozlovs represented an ongoing threat that needed to be neutralized permanently, not temporarily. You couldn't negotiate with people like that. You could only eliminate them or redirect their attention elsewhere. Danny had returned to school, though Rob could see the strain in his son's face. The boy was processing trauma that no 15-year-old should have to handle, learning lessons about trust and betrayal that would shape his character for the rest of his life. Rob had arranged for counseling, but some wounds could only heal with time. The video has been completely destroyed, Trevor reported on the second day, his voice hoarse from stress and sleepless nights. Morrison wiped his servers and destroyed the hardware. There's no trace of it anywhere. Good, Rob said. Now tell me about the Kozlovs. Trevor's face went ashen. What about them? Their business model, their operations, their weaknesses. Everything you know. Rob, you don't understand. These aren't people you can intimidate or outsmart. They're businessmen, Rob interrupted. Violent businessmen, but businessmen nonetheless. They respond to profit and loss like everyone else. The question is how to make your debt more expensive to collect than it's worth. Rob had been researching the Kozlov organization since Pete first mentioned them. They operated several legitimate businesses: a trucking company, 2 restaurants, a construction supply warehouse. The construction connection was interesting. Rob had never dealt with them directly, but he knew their reputation in the industry. Alexei Kozlov, Rob mused, reading from a file on his desk, owns Kozlov Materials, supplies concrete and steel to half the contractors in the city, including some of my competitors. Trevor looked confused. What does that have to do with? Everything. Rob's smile was sharp. See, Trevor, you're thinking like a small-time criminal, but I think like a businessman. And in business, leverage is everything. Rob picked up his phone and dialed a number he'd memorized hours earlier. The call was answered on the second ring by a heavily accented voice. Kozlov Materials. This is Alexei. Mr. Kozlov, this is Robert Mitchell of Mitchell & Sons Construction. I understand we have a mutual acquaintance who's created some complications. There was a pause, the sound of calculation. Mr. Mitchell, your reputation precedes you. What complications? Trevor Kane owes you money. Money he borrowed to finance an operation against my family. That operation has failed, and Mr. Kane is now under my protection. Another pause, longer this time. Protection is expensive, Mr. Mitchell. $80,000 expensive. I'm not calling to pay his debt. I'm calling to offer you something more valuable than money. I'm listening. Exclusive supplier status for the Riverside project. $12 million in concrete and steel, with guaranteed payment schedules and completion bonuses, plus preferential consideration for all future Mitchell & Sons projects. The silence stretched for nearly a minute. Rob could practically hear Alexei's mental calculations. 80,000 in questionable debt versus millions in legitimate business. This is contingent on Mr. Kane's debt being forgiven. Completely forgiven. Clean slate. And if Mr. Kane attempts similar operations in the future, then he becomes your problem again. But until then, he's off limits. Acceptable. I will prepare the contracts. Rob ended the call and looked at Trevor, who was staring at him in amazement. Why did you do that? Rob finished. Because smart enemies are more dangerous than smart allies. You've seen what I'm capable of when threatened. Would you rather have me as a partner or an adversary? Trevor nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his expression. What do you want from me? Information. Names. Details about everyone involved in this conspiracy. I want to know who else might come after my family, who else might think we're easy targets. And in return, you get to live. You get to start over somewhere else with a clean slate. But you disappear, Trevor, permanently. If I ever see you within 100 miles of my family again, the Kozlovs will be the least of your problems. Trevor spent the next hour detailing every aspect of the conspiracy, every person involved, every loose end that might cause future problems. Rob recorded everything, building a comprehensive picture of the threat landscape around his family. By Thursday evening, the immediate crisis was resolved. Linda had signed the final papers and would be moving to the downtown condo within the week. Trevor had a bus ticket to Portland and enough cash to start over somewhere the Kozlovs would never find him. The legal complications were settled, the financial arrangements finalized. But Rob knew this was just the beginning. The attack on his family had exposed vulnerabilities he'd never considered, blind spots in his defenses that needed to be addressed. More importantly, it had shown him something about himself, something cold and calculating that he'd kept buried under years of legitimate business success. That evening, Rob found Danny in his room, homework spread across his desk, but clearly struggling to concentrate. "How are you holding up, son?" Danny looked up, and Rob saw the same steely determination in his son's eyes that he recognized in his own mirror. "I'm angry, Dad. Really angry. At me? For how I handled this. No, at myself. For being so stupid, for letting them use me against you." Danny's voice was tight with self-recrimination. "I should have seen through it. I should have known better." Rob sat on the edge of the bed. "You're 15, Danny. You're supposed to trust people, supposed to believe that adults have your best interests at heart. What happened wasn't your fault, but I chose them over you. Even when you tried to tell me the truth, I believed them instead. And what have you learned from that?" Danny considered the question seriously. That trust has to be earned. That people can lie even when they claim to love you. That sometimes the people closest to you are the most dangerous. Rob felt a chill at his son's words. They were true, but they were also the kind of hard lessons that could turn a person cynical, cold, isolated. The kind of lessons that had shaped Rob's own character in his youth. "Those are important lessons," Rob said carefully. "But don't let them make you hard, Danny. Don't let what happened here turn you into someone who can't love or trust anyone." "How do you do it, Dad? How do you trust anyone after something like this?" Rob was quiet for a long moment, searching for an answer that would serve his son well. "You trust carefully. You verify before you believe. And you never, ever forget that some betrayals are unforgivable." Danny nodded, processing this wisdom with the seriousness of someone who'd learned adult lessons the hard way. "Dad, what's going to happen to Mom? She's going to live with the choices she made. Some consequences can't be negotiated away or bought off. She betrayed her family, and that's not something you recover from. Do you think she's sorry?" Rob considered the question. Linda had cried during the final document signing, had begged for forgiveness, had promised it would never happen again. But remorse and genuine change were different things entirely. "I think she's sorry she got caught," Rob said finally. "I think she's sorry her plan failed. Whether she's actually sorry for what she did, that's something only she can answer." Danny returned his homework, and Rob headed downstairs to his office. He had calls to make, plans to finalize, a new security structure to implement around his family. The immediate threat was neutralized, but Rob Mitchell had learned something important about himself during this crisis. He was capable of things he'd never imagined. Cold things, ruthless things, and that capability would serve him well in the battles that were surely coming. Because men like Robert Mitchell didn't just have enemies, they created them. And the price of betrayal, Rob had decided, was something he would collect in full from anyone foolish enough to threaten his family again. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. 6 months after the garage confrontation, Rob stood in his office reviewing the quarterly reports that confirmed what he already knew. Mitchell & Sons was experiencing unprecedented growth. The exclusive contract with Kozlov Materials had opened doors to larger projects, government contracts, and partnerships that would have taken years to develop through conventional channels. But success in business was only part of Rob's transformation. The man who had once trusted implicitly now verified everything. The father who had once worked long hours to provide for his family now understood that presence was more valuable than provision. The husband who had once believed in the permanence of marriage now lived alone in a house that had been purged of every trace of Linda's existence. Danny had adapted to their new reality with resilience that both impressed and worried Rob. The boy was thriving academically, excelling in sports, but there was a hardness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. At 16, Danny had learned lessons about betrayal and consequence that most people didn't master until middle age. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you," Danny said one evening over dinner. They ate together every night now, a ritual Rob had instituted to rebuild the connection that had been damaged by years of work-focused absence. "What's on your mind, son?" "I've been getting messages from Mom." Rob set down his fork carefully. Linda's contact with Danny was explicitly forbidden under the separation agreement, a violation that could result in legal consequences. "What kind of messages?" "Texts mostly, sometimes emails. She wants to see me, to explain her side of what happened. She says you're keeping us apart unfairly." Rob studied his son's face, noting the tension there. "What do you think about that?" "I think she had her chance to explain. In the garage that night, when everything came out, she chose Trevor over us, chose money over family. I don't see what else there is to discuss." The cold logic in Danny's voice was startling. Rob recognized his own analytical nature reflected in his son, but worried about the emotional cost of such detachment. "Danny, she's still your mother. Despite everything that happened, despite the choices she made, that biological connection doesn't mean anything," Danny interrupted. "Biology doesn't create obligation. Love and loyalty have to be earned, just like respect. She forfeited her right to be my mother when she tried to destroy my father." Rob felt a mixture of pride and concern at his son's moral clarity. The boy had developed an ethical framework that was admirably consistent, but potentially limiting. Learning to never forgive meant never being vulnerable, but it also meant never experiencing the full range of human connection. "Have you responded to her messages?" "Once. I told her that any contact needed to go through you, that I wasn't interested in secret communication. She hasn't respected that boundary." Rob made a mental note to have his lawyer send Linda another cease and desist letter. Testing boundaries was typical behavior for someone who'd lost control and was looking for any avenue back into the lives she'd abandoned. "There's something else," Danny continued. "I've been doing some research on Trevor." "What kind of research?" "Social media, public records, business registrations. I wanted to know what happened to him after he left town." Rob had been wondering the same thing, but hadn't actively investigated. Trevor Kane's fate was less important than ensuring he stayed gone, but curiosity was natural. "What did you find?" "He's in Portland, like you suggested, working a used car lot, living in a studio apartment. Completely different life than what he had here." Danny paused. "He looks broken." "Good," Rob said without hesitation. "Actions have consequences. He chose to target our family, and now he's living with the results of that choice." "Do you think he learned his lesson?" Rob considered the question. Men like Trevor Kane were fundamentally opportunistic, always looking for angles, always calculating risk versus reward. The question wasn't whether he'd learned a lesson. It was whether he'd learned the right lesson. "He learned that I'm not an easy target," Rob said finally. Whether he learned not to target anyone is a different question entirely. That weekend, Rob received a call that confirmed his instincts about unfinished business. Pete Romano's voice was tense with professional concern. "Rob, we need to talk. In person. How soon can you get to my office?" An hour later, Rob sat across from his childhood friend in the detective's cramped office, studying crime scene photos that made his blood run cold. "Alexei Kozlov was found dead in his office 3 days ago," Pete explained. "Professional hit, very clean, very thorough. The kind of work that costs serious money." Rob stared at the photos, his mind racing through implications. "Any suspects?" "Competing organizations, mostly. The Kozlovs have been expanding their territory, stepping on toes. But there's something else." Pete leaned forward. "Alexei had been asking questions about you, about your business, your family, your relationship with Trevor Kane. Starting about 2 weeks ago, he was being very careful, very discreet, but word gets around in my business." Rob processed this information, feeling pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Someone hired Alexei to investigate me, then killed him to cover their tracks. That's my working theory. The question is who and why now, 6 months after the Trevor Kane situation was resolved. Rob thought about Linda's messages to Danny, about boundary testing and probing for weaknesses. Pete, I need you to look into something for me. Linda's been trying to contact Danny against court orders. I want to know if she's working alone or if someone's encouraging that contact. You think she's involved in this? I think someone is cleaning up loose ends. Alexei knew about Trevor's debt, about the deal we made to resolve it. If someone wanted to eliminate all traces of that arrangement. Pete nodded grimly. They need to silence everyone involved. Trevor, Linda, Alexei, potentially you and Danny. The scope of the threat was becoming clear. This wasn't random violence or competitive business practices. This was a systematic elimination of witnesses to the events 6 months ago. Someone was preparing for something that required complete secrecy. I need protection for Danny, Rob said. Whatever this is, whoever's behind it, they're thinking long-term and they're thinking thoroughly. Already arranged. Patrol units will be monitoring your house and Danny's school. But Rob, Pete's expression was serious. You need to consider the possibility that you're not just a target. You might be the primary target. Rob had been thinking the same thing. The attack on his family 6 months ago had been personal, driven by greed and desperation. This felt different, professional, calculated, methodical. The kind of operation that required resources and planning. Who benefits from my death? Rob asked aloud. Besides Linda? Your business competitors, anyone who owes you money, anyone who's been on the wrong side of your deals over the years. Pete consulted his notes. You made enemies, Rob. Successful men always do. But even as Pete spoke, Rob was thinking deeper, looking for connections that went beyond simple business rivalry. The timing was wrong for coincidence. 6 months after the Trevor Kane crisis, just as his business was reaching new heights of success, just as his relationship with Danny was stronger than ever, someone wanted to tear it all down. Pete, I need you to dig into Linda's finances since the separation. See if she's been receiving money from unknown sources, if anyone's been supporting her lifestyle. You think she's being bankrolled? I think she's being used. Again, and this time, the people using her are much more dangerous than Trevor Kane ever was. Rob left the police station with a clear understanding of his situation. The attack on his family 6 months ago hadn't been an isolated incident. It had been phase one of a longer campaign. Someone with resources and patience was systematically targeting the Mitchell family, and they'd been planning this operation for months. But if his enemies thought Robert Mitchell would be easier to eliminate than he'd been to intimidate, they were about to learn the same lesson Trevor Kane had learned. Rob had built his empire by being smarter, tougher, and more ruthless than his competitors. Now he would defend it the same way. The war for his family's survival was just beginning, and Rob intended to win it decisively. Because the price of losing wasn't just his life or his business. It was his son's future, and that was something Robert Mitchell would never allow anyone to threaten. Chapter 8, Blood and Steel. The attack came at dawn on a Tuesday, professional and swift. Rob's security system detected the breach at 5:47 a.m. 3 vehicles, 8 men, military precision. But Robert Mitchell hadn't survived 30 years in construction by being unprepared for dangerous situations. The safe room he'd built in the basement could withstand a direct assault for hours. Danny was there in 30 seconds, confused but trusting his father's emergency protocols. Rob activated the silent alarm, connecting directly to Pete Romano's private line, then armed himself with weapons he'd hoped never to use. Dad, what's happening? Danny's voice was steady despite the circumstances, a testament to the emotional resilience he'd developed since his mother's betrayal. Someone's trying to finish what they started 6 months ago, Rob replied, checking the monitor feed from cameras positioned around the property. Professional team, military equipment. This isn't random. Through the basement speakers, they could hear footsteps above, systematic searching, the sound of furniture being overturned. The intruders were being thorough, looking for something specific. Rob's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. We have Linda. Trade yourself for her location. You have 10 minutes. The tactical situation crystallized instantly. This wasn't just an assassination attempt. It was a hostage crisis designed to force Rob into an impossible choice. Save the woman who'd betrayed him, or let her die knowing he could have prevented it. Danny, listen to me very carefully, Rob said, pulling his son away from the monitors. I need you to stay in this room, no matter what happens upstairs. There's a secondary exit through the tunnel that leads to the neighbor's basement. If anything happens to me, you use that route and get to Pete Romano. Dad, you're not going up there. This is obviously a trap. Of course it's a trap, but it's also an opportunity. Rob smiled grimly. They think they know Robert Mitchell, the businessman, the family man, the legitimate contractor. They don't know the man I was before I built all this. Rob had grown up in neighborhoods where survival meant violence, where disputes were settled with fists and sometimes worse. Those skills have been dormant for decades, buried under suits and contracts and legitimate success. But they'd never disappeared entirely. The house's intercom crackled with an unfamiliar voice. Mr. Mitchell, we know you're here. This doesn't have to be complicated. Come upstairs, and we could discuss terms like civilized people. Rob keyed the intercom response. Send me proof that Linda's alive, then we'll talk. Proof is expensive, Mr. Mitchell. But I suppose we can afford a small investment. A phone buzzed with an incoming video call. Linda's face appeared on screen, terror-stricken but apparently unharmed. She was in what looked like an abandoned warehouse, surrounded by armed men. Rob, her voice was barely a whisper. They said they'll let me go if you. The video cut off, replaced by text. Ground floor. Alone. 5 minutes. Rob made his choice with the cold calculation that had built his empire. Linda's fate was her own responsibility. She'd chosen to involve herself with dangerous people, chosen to betray her family, chosen the path that led to this moment. But Danny's safety was non-negotiable. Son, I need you to understand something. Whatever happens next, whatever you see or hear, remember that everything I do is to protect you. Everything. Danny's eyes widened as he processed his father's tone. Dad, you're scaring me. Good. Fear keeps you alive. Stay in this room. Use the tunnel if necessary. Trust only Pete Romano. Rob kissed his son's forehead. I love you, Danny. Remember that. Rob armed himself with tools from his construction days. Weapons that wouldn't trigger metal detectors, but could be devastatingly effective in experienced hands. He'd learned violence in back alleys and bar fights, refined it during years when solving problems with physical force was simply another business tool. The man waiting in Rob's living room was exactly what he'd expected. Military bearing, expensive clothes, the kind of professional competence that costs serious money. 2 associates flanked him, similarly equipped and positioned. Mr. Mitchell, thank you for being reasonable. Let's skip the pleasantries. Who are you, and what do you want? My name is irrelevant. What I want is simple. The complete destruction of evidence from a certain video project 6 months ago, along with elimination of all witnesses to related financial arrangements. Rob kept his expression neutral. Trevor Kane's operation was thoroughly dismantled. There's nothing left to clean up. Except you, Mr. Mitchell, and your son, and the unfortunately persistent Ms. Linda Mitchell, who's been asking inconvenient questions about money transfers and offshore accounts. The pieces finally clicked into place. Linda hadn't been randomly testing boundaries with her messages to Danny. She'd been investigating the financial trail from Trevor's operation, trying to understand where the money had really come from and where it had gone. She found something, Rob said. She found enough to be dangerous. Names, account numbers, transaction records. Information that could expose operations much larger than Trevor Kane's amateur schemes. So you're cleaning house. We're protecting investments. Mr. Mitchell, your reputation for intelligence is well-deserved. Surely you understand that some secrets are worth killing for. Rob did understand, but understanding didn't mean accepting. These people had made a fundamental error in judgment. They'd assumed Robert Mitchell would negotiate when cornered, just as Trevor Kane had assumed 6 months earlier. Here's what's going to happen, Rob said, his voice carrying the authority that had commanded construction crews and boardrooms for decades. You're going to release Linda. You're going to leave my son alone, and you're going to disappear from our lives permanently. The lead man smiled. And if we refuse, then you're going to learn why smart people don't threaten Robert Mitchell. The violence that followed was swift and brutal. Rob moved with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to fight before he'd learned to negotiate, using tools and techniques that had been honed in environments far more dangerous than corporate boardrooms. The first man went down with a nail gun to the chest, a construction tool repurposed for close-quarters combat. The second fell to a framing hammer applied with surgical precision. The third managed to draw his weapon before Rob's crowbar opened his skull like an overripe fruit. Professional killers, Rob had learned, were often unprepared for legitimate violence from unexpected sources. They planned for resistance from other professionals, not from successful businessmen who remembered how to kill with their hands. Rob's phone rang as he stood among the bodies. Pete Romano's voice was tense with urgency. "Rob, we found the warehouse. Linda's alive, but barely. These people were planning to eliminate everyone connected to the Kane operation. How many others are there? Unknown. But Rob, we found financial records. This goes deeper than Trevor Kane. Someone's been using small-time cons to test larger operations, identifying targets for much bigger schemes." Rob processed this information while surveying his destroyed living room. The attack on his family hadn't been personal. It had been professional. A test run for operations targeting other wealthy families, other successful businessmen. "Pete, I need you to listen carefully. There are 3 bodies in my house. Professional killers, armed and dangerous. They came here to kill me and my son, and they had Linda as leverage." "Jesus, Rob. Are you?" "I'm fine. Danny's safe. But this isn't over. Someone sent these people, someone with resources and connections. We need to find them before they send more." Rob ended the call and looked around his destroyed home. The house where he'd built a life, raised a son, trusted a wife who'd betrayed him. It was just property now, another asset to be protected or abandoned as circumstances demanded. What mattered was Danny's safety and the absolute certainty that no one would ever threaten his family again. Robert Mitchell had learned something important about himself during this crisis. He was capable of anything necessary to protect what he loved. And anyone foolish enough to test that capability would discover, as Trevor Kane and these professional killers had discovered, that the price of threatening Robert Mitchell was always paid in full. Chapter 9. New Foundations. 2 years after the warehouse confrontation, Robert Mitchell stood in his new office overlooking the harbor, watching construction crews put finishing touches on the Mitchell security complex. What had begun as a personal defense measure had evolved into a comprehensive security consulting firm, serving wealthy families and successful businesses throughout the region. The events that destroyed his marriage and tested his family had transformed Rob from a traditional contractor into something harder, more focused, infinitely more dangerous to those who might threaten what he protected. Mitchell and Sons still operated, still built quality structures throughout the tri-state area. But Mitchell Security was where Rob's true attention focused now, preventing other families from experiencing the kind of betrayal that had nearly destroyed his own. "Dad, the Portland team just checked in," Danny announced, entering the office with a tablet full of updates. At 18, Danny had grown into his father's analytical nature while maintaining the moral clarity that had emerged from his mother's betrayal. He would start college in the fall, but had spent his gap year learning the family businesses from the ground up. "Any issues with the Kane surveillance?" "None. He's maintained the same routine for 23 months. Work, apartment, grocery store. No contact with criminal associates. No unusual financial activity. Either he's genuinely reformed or he's extremely careful." Rob suspected the latter. Men like Trevor Kane didn't reform. They adapted, evolved, learned from their mistakes. Keeping him under observation wasn't about punishment. It was about early warning. If Trevor ever decided to return to his old profession, Rob intended to know about it immediately. "What about Linda?" Danny's expression hardened slightly. "Same as always. The condo downtown, part-time job at the art gallery, limited social circle. She's been asking around about you again, trying to get information from your old business associates." Linda had never stopped probing for weaknesses, never stopped looking for angles. The financial settlement from their divorce had been generous but finite, and Rob suspected she was calculating whether another approach might yield better results. She learned nothing from Trevor's failure, except to be more careful about her methods. Any direct contact attempts? 3 messages this week. I deleted them without reading. Danny's relationship with his mother had remained severed since that night in the garage. Rob had offered counseling, encouraged reconciliation, even arranged supervised visits during the legal proceedings. But Danny's decision had been absolute and unwavering. Linda Mitchell had forfeited her right to be his mother when she chose betrayal over family. Rob worried about the emotional cost of such complete rejection, but he also respected his son's moral consistency. Danny had learned the hardest lesson anyone could learn, that trust, once broken completely, could never be rebuilt. The Harrison contract is ready for your signature, Danny continued, setting the tablet aside. Full estate security for the next 5 years. They specifically requested you personally after what happened to the Andersons. The Anderson case had been Rob's most high-profile success, preventing a kidnapping attempt against the tech mogul's family by identifying the threat weeks before it materialized. The methods Mitchell Security employed were unconventional, often legally questionable, but absolutely effective. Any word from Pete about the federal investigation? Still ongoing. The people behind the warehouse operation had connections in 12 states, operations targeting at least 30 families. The FBI thinks they were building towards something much larger. Rob had provided extensive cooperation with federal investigators, sharing everything he'd learned about the conspiracy that had targeted his family. But he'd also maintained private channels of information, ensuring that Mitchell Security stayed ahead of any threats that official law enforcement might miss. The war that had begun with Trevor Kane's amateur extortion scheme had revealed a much larger criminal enterprise. Professional operations targeting successful families, exploiting personal vulnerabilities to steal wealth and destroy lives. Rob's successful defense of his own family had made him a valuable ally to law enforcement and a sought-after protector for other potential targets. Danny, there's something we need to discuss. His son looked up from the tablet, instantly alert. Over the past 2 years, they developed a communication style based on absolute honesty and mutual respect. No secrets, no protected feelings, no assumptions that problems would resolve themselves without direct action. It's about your mother. Danny's expression didn't change, but Rob noticed the slight tension in his shoulders. What about her? She's dying. The words hung in the air between them. Rob had received the medical information from Linda's doctor 3 days earlier. Pancreatic cancer, advanced stage, prognosis measured in months rather than years. How long? Danny asked, his voice professionally calm. 6 months, maybe less. Danny nodded, processing the information with the same analytical detachment he brought to security assessments and business analysis. Does she know you know? Yes. She asked me to tell you. Asked if you might consider visiting her. And what did you tell her? That the decision was yours to make. Danny was quiet for several minutes, staring out at the harbor where fishing boats were returning with their morning catch. Rob waited, knowing that his son needed time to work through the emotional complexities of the situation. She made her choice, Danny said finally. When she chose Trevor over us, when she decided to destroy our family for money, she ended any claim to my concern or my presence. Even knowing she's dying, especially knowing she's dying, this is her last chance to manipulate me, to use guilt and sympathy to get the emotional connection she forfeited through her actions. Rob felt a chill at his son's cold analysis, even as he admired the logical consistency. Danny had learned from his mother's betrayal, but perhaps he'd learned too well. Danny, mercy isn't weakness. Compassion doesn't require trust. You can acknowledge her suffering without forgiving her betrayal. Can I? Or would visiting her send the message that betrayal can be overcome with enough time and the right circumstances? It was a fair question, one that Rob had been wrestling with since receiving Linda's diagnosis. The moral framework they'd built together emphasized consequences, accountability, the permanent nature of certain choices. But it also risked creating people who were incapable of forgiveness, mercy, or growth? What do you think I should do? Danny asked. Rob considered his answer carefully. His son was 18 now, legally an adult, intellectually mature beyond his years. But he was also carrying wounds that might never fully heal, shaped by lessons that were both necessary and potentially limiting. I think you should remember that showing mercy to someone who's dying doesn't excuse their betrayal of you when they were living. You can be kind without being weak, compassionate without being foolish. Danny nodded slowly. And if I choose not to see her, then that's your choice to make, and I'll support it completely. What about you? Will you see her? Rob thought about Linda, the beautiful young waitress he'd fallen in love with, the woman who'd shared his dreams and helped him build a life, the wife who'd ultimately chosen to destroy everything they'd created together. Yes, he said finally. Not to forgive her, not to rebuild anything, but to close the circle. To end this chapter of our lives with clarity rather than unfinished business. Danny returned to his tablet, but Rob could see he was struggling with the decision. The boy had built his emotional defenses around absolute principles, but real life rarely offered absolute situations. Take your time, Rob said. Whatever you decide, we'll handle it together. That evening, Rob drove to Linda's condo for the first time since their divorce was finalized. She answered the door looking frail but still recognizable. The woman he'd shared 18 years with, now facing the consequences of choices that had seemed so important 2 years ago. Rob, thank you for coming. They sat in her living room, surrounded by furniture he'd paid for, artwork they'd selected together, photographs of a family that no longer existed. The conversation was awkward, stilted, weighted with history that couldn't be undone. I know you hate me, Linda said finally. I don't hate you, Rob replied honestly. Hate requires emotional investment. You're simply someone I used to know who made choices I can't respect. Linda flinched at the cold assessment, but nodded as if she'd expected nothing else. Will Danny come see me? I don't know. That's his decision to make. He's become just like you, hasn't he? Hard, unforgiving, incapable of mercy. Rob studied the woman who'd once been his wife, seeing the manipulation even in her dying moments. He's become someone who understands that actions have consequences. That trust, once broken, can't be rebuilt with words and time. And you think that's healthy? That emotional isolation? I think it's realistic. You taught him that the people closest to him could be the most dangerous. That's a lesson that will serve him well. Linda began to cry, quiet tears that might have moved him once, before he'd learned the cost of misplaced trust. I made a mistake, Rob. A terrible mistake. But I loved you both in my way. No, Rob said firmly. You loved what we could provide for you. Security, status, comfort. When you thought you could get those things more easily through betrayal than through loyalty, you chose betrayal. People change, Rob. People can learn from their mistakes, grow beyond their failures. Some people can. You had 2 years to prove you'd changed, to demonstrate growth or remorse or accountability. Instead, you've spent that time probing for new angles, testing boundaries, looking for ways to reinsert yourself into our lives. Linda's tears stopped as she processed the accusation. You've been watching me. Of course I have. You proved you can't be trusted, so trust became irrelevant. Verification became essential, and you'll watch me until I die. Until you die, or until you prove you're no longer a threat to my son's emotional well-being. Linda nodded slowly, finally understanding that this conversation wasn't about reconciliation or forgiveness. It was about establishing final parameters, closing accounts, ensuring that her death wouldn't create new complications for the family she'd abandoned. Tell Danny, she said as Rob prepared to leave. Tell him I'm sorry. Not for the consequences, not for getting caught, but for the choice itself. For choosing someone else over the family I was supposed to protect. Rob looked back at her from the doorway. I'll tell him. Whether he believes it or cares about it is up to him. Linda Mitchell died 6 weeks later, alone in a hospice room, surrounded by flowers from people who'd known her briefly rather than deeply. Danny didn't attend the funeral, though he sent a single white rose with no note attached. Standing at her graveside, Rob felt neither satisfaction nor regret. Linda's death was simply the end of a chapter that had concluded long before her diagnosis. The woman he'd loved had died the night she chose Trevor Kane over her family. What had passed away in the hospice was simply the physical remainder of someone who'd become a stranger through her own choices. No regrets? Pete Romano asked, standing beside his oldest friend as other mourners dispersed. None, Rob replied. She made her choices. We all live and die with the consequences of our decisions. And Danny? Rob looked toward his son, who was waiting by the car, strong and self-possessed, and utterly unmoved by the ceremony they'd just witnessed. Danny learned the most important lesson anyone can learn, that trust must be earned and that betrayal has permanent consequences. That's a hard way to live. It's an honest way to live. And in the long run, honesty serves people better than sentiment. They walked toward the car together, leaving Linda Mitchell's grave behind without looking back. The chapter was closed, the accounts were settled, and the future stretched ahead with the clarity that came from understanding exactly what was worth protecting and what price you were willing to pay to protect it. Robert Mitchell had built an empire with his hands, defended it with his mind, and preserved it through his willingness to do whatever was necessary when threatened. His son had learned those same lessons and would carry them forward into whatever challenges awaited. Some stories ended with forgiveness and reconciliation. This one ended with justice, accountability, and the understanding that actions have consequences that can't be negotiated away or bought off or forgiven into irrelevance. It ended, in other words, exactly as it should have. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, Check Outline. Carol Anderson had learned to read people in his 15 years managing risk assessment for Fortune 500 companies. The trembling hands, the downcast eyes, the way someone's shoulders collapsed when their credit card declined. He saw it all from his position in line at Rosewood Market, 3 items in his basket, watching the elderly woman ahead of him fumble through her purse with increasing desperation. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the cashier, her voice papery thin. "I could have sworn I transferred the funds. Let me just—" "Ma'am," the cashier said, not unkindly, but with the efficient tone of someone who'd seen this play out before. Carol stepped forward. "I'll cover it." The woman turned, and something flickered across her weathered face. Recognition, perhaps, or surprise. She had gray-green eyes that seemed to hold entire histories in their depths. "Young man, that's not necessary." "It's $40, Carol said, already handing his card to the cashier. "We all have tough days." "You have your mother's kindness," she said softly, and smiled with such warmth that Carol felt something crack in his chest. She didn't clarify which mother, didn't elaborate, just gathered her bags with trembling hands. "Wait," Carol said, but she was already shuffling toward the automatic doors, moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose body had begun betraying them. He watched her disappear into the October evening, that strange comment echoing in his mind. Your mother's kindness. His mother, Patricia Anderson, had been dead for 6 years. Cervical cancer, and she'd been about as kind as a steel trap. Efficient, yes. Organized, certainly. But kind? That wasn't a word Carol associated with the woman who'd raised him with military precision and emotional distance. He drove home to the Colonial in Rosewood Heights, the neighborhood where success lived behind manicured lawns and the appearance of perfect marriages. The house was dark when he pulled into the driveway at 7:47 p.m. Brittany's Lexus was gone. Carol sat in his car for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled, and pulled out his phone. No messages. No missed calls. 3 nights this week, she'd been working late at her boutique marketing firm. 3 nights of coming home to an empty house and dinner alone. He'd met Brittany Hagan 5 years ago at an industry conference in Chicago. She'd been magnetic, blonde, beautiful, with a laugh that could light up a room and ambition that matched his own. They'd married after a whirlwind 9-month courtship. For the first 2 years, it had been good. Better than good. But lately, Carol shook his head and grabbed his groceries. No point dwelling on things he couldn't control. That's what his therapist, Dr. Reeves, kept telling him. Focus on what you can control. Inside, he microwaved leftovers and opened his laptop to review the Consolidated Industries assessment he'd been working on. Numbers were comfortable, predictable. Unlike people, they didn't lie unless someone made them lie, and Carol had gotten very good at spotting manipulated data. His phone buzzed at 9:33 p.m. Brittany, working late again. Don't wait up. Love you. Carol stared at the message. 3 words at the end that felt like an obligation rather than a declaration. He typed back, be safe. See you in the morning. He fell asleep on the couch watching financial news and woke to his phone ringing at 6:47 a.m. Unknown number. Carol Anderson? A man's voice, professionally modulated. Speaking. This is Felix Lambert, attorney at law. I'm calling regarding Geraldine Adams. I'm very sorry to inform you that she passed away last night. You're listed as a beneficiary in her will. Carol sat up, fully awake now. I'm sorry, who? Geraldine Adams. She specified that you'd met yesterday at Rosewood Market. She was quite insistent that we contact you immediately upon her passing. The elderly woman. The one he'd helped. How old is she? What happened? Natural causes. She'd been ill for some time. Felix Lambert's voice softened slightly. Mr. Anderson, this is unusual, but she left specific instructions. Could you meet me at my office today? There are matters that require immediate attention. Chapter 2. The Letter. Felix Lambert's office occupied the corner suite of a glass tower downtown, the kind of place where wealthy people handled the complex machinery of their wealth. Carol had taken a personal day, the first in 8 months, and now sat across from a man in his 60s with silver hair and the bearing of someone who'd witnessed countless family secrets. Before we begin, Felix said, sliding a sealed envelope across the mahogany desk, Geraldine wanted you to read this. In private, if you prefer. Carol stared at the cream-colored envelope. His name was written in elegant, shaking script across the front. I don't understand. I'd never met her before yesterday. Perhaps the letter will clarify. Felix stood. I'll give you a moment. Alone in the office, Carol opened the envelope with fingers that had begun to shake. The letter inside was 2 pages, the handwriting growing progressively less steady as it went on. Dear Carol, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. The doctors gave me 2 months, but I knew it would be less. The heart always knows. I've watched you from a distance for 34 years. Every birthday, every achievement, every moment I couldn't be there for. I gave you up when you were 3 days old because I was 17, terrified, and convinced you deserved better than what I could provide. I never stopped loving you. I never stopped being your mother. I saw your picture in the Business Journal last year, Rising Stars in Risk Assessment, and my heart recognized you before my mind did. You have your father's build, his serious eyes, but my smile. Or at least, you have the smile I used to have before life carved it away. Yesterday at the store was no accident. I've been going there every Tuesday for 3 months, hoping to see you. When my car declined, I may have arranged that. I wanted to see what kind of man you'd become. You didn't hesitate. You were kind without expectation of return. That's rare. The money I'm leaving you, it's substantial. I built a small company into something significant over the past 30 years. I had nothing else to live for, really, except building something I could one day give to you. But there's something else you need to know, and I'm dying before I can tell you properly. Your birth certificate, the one you've never seen, it lists my name. But more importantly, it lists your father's name. Patricia and Robert Anderson adopted you through a private arrangement. They promised to tell you the truth when you turn 18, but they never did they? Your father is alive, Carol, and he's closer than you think. Be careful who you trust. I've been watching not just you, but those around you. Love doesn't always show its true face. With all my heart, Geraldine Adams, your first mother. Carol read it 3 times. His hands weren't shaking anymore. They'd gone completely still, the way they always did when he was processing information that would change everything. Felix returned, perhaps alerted by some silent timer. You've read it. I was adopted. Carol's voice came out flat. My parents, the Andersons, they never told me. I have your original birth certificate here. Felix produced a sealed document from his desk drawer, along with the will and other relevant documents. The estate is valued at approximately $200 million. It includes her company, Adams Consulting Group, pharmaceutical research analytics, along with various properties and investments. $200 million. The number was so large it felt abstract. Carol opened the birth certificate with steady hands. Mother, Geraldine Marie Adams' father, Sean Robert Bishop. The room tilted. Carol gripped the edge of the desk. Mr. Anderson? Felix's voice came from very far away. Sean Bishop, his former business partner. The man who'd helped him start his consulting firm 8 years ago. The man who'd been the best man at his wedding. The man who'd been noticeably absent from his life for the past 6 months after a disagreement about company direction led to Sean selling his shares and walking away. Sean Bishop was his father. Carol stood, then sat back down. I need a minute. Of course. May I get you some water? Coffee. Black. Strong. While Felix busied himself at a sidebar coffee station, Carol's mind raced through implications and connections. Sean had introduced him to Brittany. They'd met at that conference, yes, but Sean had been the one to specifically suggest Carol attend that particular panel where Brittany was speaking. Sean had encouraged the relationship, been enthusiastic about the engagement. How much had Sean known? How long had he known? There's one more thing, Felix said, returning with coffee in a porcelain cup. Geraldine hired a private investigator 6 months ago. She was concerned about certain people in your life. The report is included in your inheritance packet. She wanted you to have all the information before you made any decisions about the estate. Felix placed a manila folder on the desk. It was thick, at least 100 pages. Take your time, Mr. Anderson. This is a great deal to process. The inheritance is legally yours. There's no contest, no conditions except one. You must read everything before you accept or decline. Those were Geraldine's specific instructions. Chapter 3. Evidence and Shadows. Carol didn't go home. He went to his office, locked himself in his corner room, and began reading the investigator's report. By page 30, his coffee had gone cold. By page 60, he'd stopped feeling surprise. By page 90, he'd started planning. The investigator, a woman named Donna Carpenter with 20 years in law enforcement, had been thorough. Photographs, phone records, financial transactions, meeting logs, text message screenshots. It was a masterclass in surveillance, and the story it told made Carol's blood run cold. Brittany and Sean had been meeting regularly for the past 8 months. Not just meeting. The photographs showed them leaving hotels together, dining at restaurants 40 miles outside Rosewood, their body language telling a story that didn't require captions. But it was deeper than a simple affair. Financial records showed Sean had been funneling money to Brittany's business, $50,000 3 months ago, another $75,000 5 weeks ago. Bank statements showed Brittany had increased her life insurance policy on Carol from $500,000 to $2 million 6 months ago. The report included transcripts from a listening device Donna had planted in Brittany's car. Carol recognized the legal gray area there, possibly even illegal, but he kept reading. Brittany, when do you think she'll die? Sean, doctor said weeks, not months. Then we just need to be patient a little longer. Brittany, I'm tired of being patient. I'm tired of pretending with him. Sean, it'll be worth it. $200 million is worth playing house for a few more months. Once she's dead and he inherits, we wait 6 months. Then you file for divorce. California's a community property state. You'll get half of everything. We'll finally be together, and Carol will never know I'm his father. Brittany, unless she told him. Sean, she won't. She gave him up. She's got too much shame to face him now. But Geraldine had told him, or tried to, and now Carol sat with evidence of a conspiracy that made his chest ache with a hollow feeling that might have been grief or rage or both. His phone buzzed. Brittany, home early tonight. Let's have dinner. I miss you. Carol stared at the message for a long moment, then typed, Perfect. I'll cook. Be home by 7. He spent the rest of the afternoon making careful phone calls. First to Donna Carpenter, whose number was in the report. "Mr. Anderson," she said when she answered. "I'm sorry for your loss. Did you know her well? Well enough to know she loved you more than anything in this world. She hired me to protect you. Can you still help me?" A pause. "What do you need?" "Justice. And I'm willing to pay whatever it takes. With Geraldine gone, I'm no longer under retainer. But I'll help you pro bono." She was a good woman. "What they're planning?" Donna's voice hardened. "Yeah, I'll help." Next, Carol called Tyler Fry, his only real friend from college and the one person in his life who'd never had an agenda. Tyler worked as a cybersecurity consultant, and more importantly, had a flexible moral compass when it came to electronic surveillance. "I need your help," Carol said, "and it's probably illegal." "Best way to start a Tuesday," Tyler replied. "What's the play?" By 6:30 p.m., Carol was home, preparing dinner with the mechanical precision of someone going through familiar motions. Chicken marsala, Brittany's favorite. Salad with that specific balsamic dressing she liked. Wine breathing on the counter. A $200 bottle from their wedding that he'd been saving for a special occasion. This qualified. Brittany arrived at 7:04, perfectly put together in her designer business casual, her blonde hair in the artfully messy style that probably took 30 minutes to achieve. "Something smells amazing," she said, kissing his cheek. The kiss felt like a practiced gesture, warm enough to seem genuine, but empty of actual affection. How had he not noticed before? Or had he noticed and chosen not to see? "How was work?" Carol asked, plating the food. "Exhausting. New client, lots of demands." She accepted the wine glass he handed her. "How was your day?" "Interesting, actually. Got a call from a lawyer. Apparently, I've inherited some money." Brittany froze for just a fraction of a second, her wine glass halfway to her lips. "Really? From who?" "An old woman I helped at the grocery store yesterday. Turns out she was wealthy. Left me everything." Wow. That's incredible. How much?" Carol watched her face carefully. Her pupils had dilated slightly. Her breathing had quickened. She was excited, but trying to hide it. "The lawyer said it's complicated. Trusts, properties, that kind of thing. Could be substantial, but it'll take months to sort out." "Well," Brittany said, raising her glass, "to unexpected fortunes." They clinked glasses. Carol took a small sip. Brittany drank deeper. Over dinner, she was animated in a way she hadn't been in months, asking questions about the inheritance, about the lawyer, about timelines. Carol fed her carefully curated information, enough to seem forthcoming, not enough to reveal he knew everything. "There's one weird thing," he said, pushing food around his plate. "The lawyer mentioned something about my birth certificate. Apparently, my parents never told me something important about my adoption." Brittany went very still. "Your adoption? I didn't know either. Turns out Patricia and Robert Anderson weren't my biological parents. I was adopted as an infant." Carol washed her face. "The lawyer said my biological father is alive. Someone I apparently know." That's... Brittany's knuckles were white on her fork. "That's insane. Do they know who?" "The lawyer's looking into it. Said he'll have answers next week." Brittany excused herself to the bathroom shortly after. Through the baby monitor system Tyler had helped him activate earlier. It was nominally for the future children they discussed, but never pursued. Carol heard her make a phone call. "We have a problem," she hissed. "He knows about the adoption. Lambert might have told him about you." Sean's voice was tinny through the speaker, but clear enough. "Calm down. Even if he knows I'm his father, he doesn't know about us. Just stick to the plan." "I don't like this, Sean. 6 more months, baby. Then we're set for life. Just keep him happy a little longer." Carol sat at the dinner table, listening to his wife conspire with his father, and felt something cold and sharp crystallize in his chest. Not anger. Anger was hot and impulsive. This was calculated, methodical. When Brittany returned, her smile was back in place. "Sorry, work call. Where were we?" "Talking about the future," Carol said, and poured her more wine. Chapter 4. The Trap Sets. Carol spent the next 2 weeks becoming someone he didn't entirely recognize. On the surface, he was the devoted husband, the curious but not suspicious son, the grateful heir. Beneath that, he was a chess player moving pieces into position. He accepted the inheritance formally, signing papers in Felix Lambert's office while the lawyer watched with sharp, knowing eyes. Geraldine wanted you to have everything you need, Felix said, including the truth. Did you know Sean Bishop was my father when you called me? I knew. Geraldine told me everything. Felix leaned back in his chair. She also told me she suspected your wife and Mr. Bishop were involved. She hoped she was wrong. She wasn't. No, Felix agreed quietly. I don't suppose she was. What will you do? Carol had considered this question from every angle. Report them to the police? Brittany and Sean hadn't actually committed a crime yet. Planning to take money in a divorce wasn't illegal. The affair was morally reprehensible, but not criminal. And the overheard conversations? Inadmissible without their consent to be recorded. No, the law wouldn't give him justice. He'd have to create it himself. I'm going to let them think they're winning, Carol said, right up until they realize they've lost everything. Felix studied him for a long moment. Geraldine said you had your father's mind for strategy. She meant that as a warning, I think. Sean Bishop is dangerous precisely because he's smart. Then it's a good thing I'm smarter. At home, Carol played his role perfectly. He discussed the inheritance with Brittany in carefully measured doses. The company was worth millions. There were properties, investment portfolios. It would take time to liquidate everything. But yes, it was substantial. Life-changing. Brittany's eyes gleamed with each revelation. She became more affectionate, more present. She even suggested they start trying for children soon, now that we're financially secure. The suggestion made Carol's stomach turn. Meanwhile, with Tyler's help, Carol installed monitoring software on Brittany's phone and laptop. Not through physical access. That was too risky, but through a phishing email disguised as a notification from her bank. She clicked the link without hesitation, and suddenly Carol could see every text, every call, every email. The messages to Sean were damning in their intimacy and their calculation. Brittany to Sean, he signed everything. The money is officially his. 6 months, and it's ours. Sean to Brittany, told you to be patient. My son always was predictable. Smart about business, clueless about people. Brittany to Sean, I almost feel bad. He's being so sweet lately. Sean to Brittany, don't go soft on me now. Remember what's waiting for us. Just keep playing the role. Donna Carpenter had been busy too. At Carol's request, she dug deeper into Sean's background, and what she found painted a picture of a man who'd made manipulation a lifestyle. He has 2 ex-wives. Donna explained during a meeting at a coffee shop 15 miles from Rosewood. Both divorced him for infidelity. Both walked away with settlements that were suspiciously small given Sean's wealth. I interviewed the first one. She was scared, wouldn't talk much, but she said Sean had leverage that made her accept less than she deserved. What kind of leverage? She wouldn't specify, but I'd bet on some form of blackmail. Sean Bishop is the kind of man who collects secrets like insurance policies. Donna slid a folder across the table. But here's where it gets interesting. 6 months before you married Brittany, Sean took out a $5 million life insurance policy on himself, with Brittany listed as sole beneficiary. Carol processed this. They were planning this from the beginning. Looks like it. I also found that Brittany's marketing firm is on the verge of bankruptcy. Has been for 2 years. She's in debt up to her eyeballs, credit cards maxed, personal loans outstanding. She needed money desperately. Then suddenly, she meets you. And suddenly Sean sells his shares in your company for cash right before marrying you. Almost like he needed liquid assets for something. For her, Carol said, he's been funding her life, keeping her afloat until I inherited. Exactly. But here's the thing. If Sean's on the hook for Brittany's debts, and she divorces you and gets half your money, he can recover everything he's invested in her and more. It's a long con, Mr. Anderson. And you were the mark from the day you were born. That night, Carol sat in his home office, surrounded by evidence of betrayal, and made his plan. It would need to be intricate, legal enough to avoid criminal charges against himself, devastating enough to destroy both Brittany and Sean completely. He called a number Felix Lambert had provided a forensic accountant named Ramon Hancock who specialized in creative financial structures. I need to create a trust, Carol said. Something that looks simple but has teeth. I'm listening, Ramon replied. Chapter 5, Gathering Allies. The inheritance had made Carol wealthy beyond anything he'd imagined, but wealth without strategy was just numbers in an account. Over the next month, he assembled his team with the precision of a general preparing for war. Donna Carpenter became his eyes and ears. She continued surveillance on Brittany and Sean, documenting their meetings, their communications, building a comprehensive picture of their relationship and their plans. Tyler Fry handled the technical side. He'd created a ghost network that allowed Carol to monitor not just Brittany's communications, but also Sean's. The older man was careful, but not careful enough. His text to Brittany revealed a man who viewed his son as nothing more than a genetic accident and a convenient means to wealth. Sean to Brittany, tell him you're pregnant. That'll lock him in emotionally. Doesn't matter if it's true. Miscarriages happen all the time. Brittany to Sean, that feels too cruel. Sean to Brittany, are you in this or not? Because if you're having second thoughts, I can find someone else. Brittany to Sean, I'm in. I'll do it. Carol read that exchange 3 times, each reading hardening something in his chest. When Brittany came to him 2 days later with tears in her eyes and news of a pregnancy that didn't exist, he played his part. Joy, excitement, promises of being a great father. He took her to dinner, bought her flowers, started talking about baby names and nursery colors. And all the while, he was building his trap. Ramon Hancock had been invaluable in structuring the inheritance into a complex web of trusts and corporate entities. On paper, Carol was wealthy. In reality, the bulk of the money sat in an irrevocable trust that couldn't be touched by divorce proceedings. This is the Greenberg Trust strategy, Ramon explained during a late-night meeting in Carol's office. Named after a 1983 case where a hedge fund manager protected his assets from his third wife. The money flows through a series of offshore accounts and shell corporations, all perfectly legal, but structured in a way that makes them divorce-proof. If Brittany files for divorce, she'll get half of your apparent assets, which will amount to maybe $5 million, and the other $195 million? Protected, untouchable. It'll look like bad luck, market downturns, poor investments, whatever story we want to tell. Ramon grinned. The beauty is it's all legal. Ethically questionable, perhaps, but legal. But Carol wanted more than financial protection. He wanted exposure, ruin, the kind of public destruction that would ensure Brittany and Sean could never do to anyone else what they'd try to do to him. For that, he needed leverage of his own. He found it in an unlikely place, Sean's business dealings. Donna had discovered that Sean's current company, Bishop Strategic Solutions, had several clients with questionable ethics. One in particular caught Carol's attention. Meridian Pharmaceuticals, a company currently under investigation for Medicare fraud. Carol had Donna dig deeper. She found evidence that Sean had been helping Meridian hide assets and manipulate billing records. Nothing explicit in writing, but enough circumstantial evidence that the right prosecutor would be interested. Then there was Brittany's fake pregnancy. With Tyler's help, Carol had been documenting every conversation about the baby. Every lie she told about doctor's appointments she never attended. Every symptom she manufactured. It wasn't illegal to fake a pregnancy to your husband, but it was revealing. Character evidence for when things went public. You're building a nuclear bomb, Tyler observed one evening as they reviewed the evidence. You know that, right? When you detonate this, it's going to be scorched earth. Good, Carol said flatly. They were planning to take everything from me. They deserve nothing less. Tyler was quiet for a moment. I've known you since freshman year. I've seen you handle corporate crises, negotiate million-dollar deals, stay calm when everything was falling apart. But this is different. Are you sure you want to go this dark? Carol thought about Geraldine, a woman he'd barely known, but who'd loved him enough to spend 30 years watching from afar. He thought about his childhood, raised by the cold and distant Andersons while his real mother suffered in silence. He thought about Brittany's fake tears about a fake pregnancy, Sean's casual cruelty in text messages about his own son. I'm sure, he said. They made their choices. Now they get to live with the consequences. The plan was coming together. But Carol needed one more piece, a witness to Sean's confession, something that would tie everything together and make the betrayal undeniable. He found his opportunity when Sean reached out after 8 months of silence. The text came in late on a Tuesday night. "Sean, we should talk. About your mother. Geraldine. I think it's time you knew the truth." Carol stared at the message, his heart rate eerily calm. This was it. Sean was going to reveal himself as Carol's father, probably to build false rapport, maybe to position himself for a share of the inheritance. "Carol, tomorrow. My office. Noon. Sean, see you there, son." That last word made Carol's jaw clench, but he kept his response simple. "Carol, looking forward to it." Chapter 6. The confrontation begins. Sean Bishop arrived at Carol's office exactly at noon, dressed in the expensive casual way that marked him as successful without trying too hard. He was 58 but looked younger, with silver at his temples that made him look distinguished rather than old. Carol could see hints of his own features in the older man's face. The same strong jaw, the same intense eyes. How had he never noticed before? "Carol." Sean extended his hand. "It's been too long." Carol shook it, feeling the firm grip that businessmen use to assert dominance. "Coffee, please." While Carol busied himself at the coffee station in his office, Tyler's voice crackled in his nearly invisible earpiece. Recording is live. Multiple angles. Audio is clear. Carol had turned his office into a surveillance studio. 3 hidden cameras, directional microphones, all feeding to secure servers that Tyler monitored remotely. Everything that was about to happen would be documented from multiple angles. "I'm glad you reached out," Carol said, handing Sean a cup. "I've had questions." "I imagine you do." Sean settled into the leather chair across from Carol's desk. "Geraldine's death must have been a shock. Less of a shock than finding out I was adopted." Carol kept his voice neutral. "Or that my biological father has been in my life all along." Sean's expression shifted, surprise, followed by something that might have been respect. "Felix told you." "Geraldine told me. In a letter." Felix just confirmed it. Carol leaned back in his chair. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" "Because I was 17 when Geraldine got pregnant." Sean's voice took on a rehearsed quality, like he'd practiced this speech. "I was a stupid kid. My parents arranged the adoption, paid Geraldine off, and I went to college like nothing happened. By the time I was old enough to have regrets, you were already 10 years old with parents who loved you. What was I supposed to do? Disrupt your life to satisfy my guilt?" It was a good speech. Almost believable. But Carol had read Geraldine's medical records. She'd been 19 when she got pregnant, working 2 jobs to support herself. Sean had been 23, already in graduate school. The age difference might have been legal, but the power dynamic wasn't. "So, you've been watching me from a distance?" Carol asked. "In a way. When you started your consulting firm, I saw an opportunity to finally be part of your life, even if you didn't know the truth. So I invested." Sean smiled. "You're brilliant, Carol. Everything I hoped you'd be. And Brittany?" Something flickered across Sean's face. "What about her? How did you two know each other before she met me?" "Because you introduced us. But I'm realizing now you must have known her before that conference." "Networking circles. Her firm did some work for one of my clients." The lie came smoothly, but Carol saw the calculation behind Sean's eyes. "Interesting, because I've been going through some of Geraldine's papers, and she hired a private investigator before she died. Apparently, she was worried about people in my life." Carol opened his desk drawer and pulled out a thin folder. Not the full report, just selected pages. "According to this investigator, you and Brittany have been meeting regularly. Hotels, restaurants, long lunches." The investigator seemed to think it was an affair. Sean's face remained calm, but his knuckles whitened on the armrest. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" "Because the investigator has photographs, dates and times, financial records showing you've given Brittany over $125,000 in the past year." Carol slid 3 photos across the desk. They showed Sean and Brittany outside a hotel in Riverside, Brittany's hand on Sean's chest, his arm around her waist. "That doesn't look like a professional relationship." "Carol, is she pregnant?" Carol asked, his voice deadly quiet. "Really pregnant? Or Is that just part of the plan? Sean stood abruptly. I don't know what you think you know. I know you've been sleeping with my wife. I know you've been funding her failing business. I know you planned to wait until I inherited Geraldine's money, then have Brittany divorce me for half. Carol's voice remained level, almost conversational. What I'm trying to figure out is whether you did this because I'm your son or in spite of it. You have no idea what you're talking about. Sit down, Sean. Fuck you. I'm leaving. Sit down. Something in Carol's voice made Sean freeze. Because if you leave now, I go to the police with everything I have. The affair, the financial manipulation, and more importantly, your involvement with Meridian Pharmaceuticals and their Medicare fraud scheme. Sean's face went pale. You're bluffing. Donna Carpenter is very thorough. She found records of your meetings with Meridian executives, emails discussing creative accounting strategies. Enough to interest the FBI. Carol leaned forward. But here's the thing. I don't want to go to the police. I want the truth. So sit down and tell me everything, and maybe we can work something out. Sean sat, but his expression had hardened. What do you want? I want to know when you decided to destroy me. Was it always the plan? From the moment you realized I existed? For a long moment, Sean said nothing. Then, surprisingly, he laughed. You really want the truth? I do. Fine. Yes, it was the plan. Not from birth. I didn't give a shit about you as a kid. But when Geraldine's company started taking off 15 years ago, I looked into what she'd done with the baby. Found out she'd given you up. Found out the Andersons had raised you. I kept tabs on you casually, more curious than anything. Sean's smile was cold. Then 5 years ago, Geraldine got sick. Pancreatic cancer the first time. They caught it early, but we all knew it would come back. And I realized she was going to leave everything to you. Millions. Maybe tens of millions. So I started planning. You introduced me to Brittany. I introduced you to a woman who desperately needed money and was willing to do anything to get it. She's in debt up to her fucking eyeballs, Carol. Failed business, max credit cards. She was about to lose everything. I offered her a way out. Marry you. Wait for you to inherit. Divorce you. Take half. We split everything 50-50. And the fake pregnancy? My idea. Makes you less likely to question things, more emotionally invested. Classic manipulation. Sean leaned back, his confidence returning. You want to know the real kicker? You were so easy to manipulate. So desperate for approval, for connection. Your adopted parents did a number on you, didn't they? Cold, distant Patricia and boring Robert. You were starving for affection, and Brittany gave you just enough to keep you hooked. Carol felt nothing listening to this. The words should have hurt, but they bounced off the ice that had formed around his heart weeks ago. And you feel no guilt about this? Guilt? Sean laughed again. Why would I? You're nothing to me. A DNA accident. You think fatherhood means something just because I contributed sperm 34 years ago? You were a mistake then, and you're a means to an end now. That's all you've ever been. I see. Carol nodded slowly. Thank you for your honesty. So what now? You go to the police with your investigator's report? Good luck proving anything. It's all circumstantial. Brittany and I are careful. Not careful enough. Carol pressed a button on his desk, and the large monitor on his wall flickered to life. It showed a split screen, 3 angles of their current conversation, complete with timestamp and audio. Sean's face drained of color. You're recording this? Every word. Multiple cameras, professional audio. And before you start threatening legal action, we're in a one-party consent state. I can record any conversation I'm part of. Carol smiled, and it was not a kind expression. You just confessed to conspiracy to commit fraud, to an extramarital affair with my wife, and to planning to take money through false pretenses. All on camera. You son of a bitch. Actually, I'm your son. You said it yourself, biologically, anyway. Carol stood. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave my office. You're going to call Brittany and tell her the plan is off. And you're both going to disappear from my life forever. Or what? Or I destroy you both so completely you'll wish you'd never heard my name. Sean stared at him, and Carol saw the moment the older man realized he'd lost. But instead of defeat, Carol saw rage. You think you're so smart. You think you've won. I have won. Not yet. Sean stood, moving toward the door. You're forgetting something, Carol. Brittany's still your wife. You still love her, whether you want to admit it or not. And love makes people do stupid things. Give it a few days and you'll soften. You'll want to forgive her. You'll convince yourself there's something worth saving. You don't know me at all. I know you better than you think. You're weak. You always have been. That's why this was so easy. Sean opened the door. This isn't over. Yes, Carol said quietly. It is. After Sean left, Tyler's voice came through the earpiece. Holy shit. Did that actually just happen? Every word documented. Multiple angles, perfect audio. This is enough to ruin him. Good. Carol sat back down at his desk. Now we move to phase 2. Chapter 7. The Wife's Move. Brittany came home that evening earlier than usual, her face a careful mask of concern. She'd heard from Sean. Carol knew because Tyler had been monitoring her phone. The messages had been panicked. Sean, he knows everything. Recording devices in his office. I told him too much. Brittany, what do I do? Sean, deny everything. Act shocked. Play the victim. It's your only chance. Brittany, I can't do this anymore. Sean, you want to go to jail for fraud? Because that's where we're both headed if you don't stick to the script. Now she stood in their kitchen, designer bag on the counter, heels kicked off, looking every bit the exhausted career woman coming home to her husband. Hey, she said softly. Rough day. You could say that. Carol was making dinner, salmon and asparagus, her other favorite. Sean came by the office. He watched her face carefully. The micro-expressions he'd learned to read in his years doing risk assessment. The slight widening of her eyes. The tensing of her jaw. The way her hand moved unconsciously to her stomach, where a fake baby supposedly grew. Really? I thought you two weren't speaking. We weren't. He wanted to talk about my inheritance. Apparently, he has some concerns about how I'm handling the money. Carol plated the salmon. He also said some interesting things about you. About me? Brittany's voice climbed slightly, and Carol heard the fear beneath the confusion. He claims you're having an affair with him, that you've been planning to take half my money in a divorce. Carol set the plates on the table. Obviously, I told him he was insane. Brittany's relief was palpable. She laughed. It almost sounded genuine. That's crazy. Why would he say something like that? I don't know. Maybe he's jealous of the inheritance. Maybe he's having some kind of breakdown. Carol pulled out her chair. But it did make me think. We should probably get ahead of this, legally speaking. If Sean's going to spread rumors about an affair, we should protect ourselves. Protect ourselves how? I talked to Felix Lambert. He suggested a post-nuptial agreement. Just to make it clear that you're entitled to what's yours, and I'm entitled to what's mine. So if anyone tries to cause problems, we have legal protection. Carol smiled at her. It's just a formality. But it would make me feel better, especially with the baby coming. Brittany sat down slowly. A post-nup? Those are for couples who don't trust each other, or for couples protecting themselves from outside interference. Sean's already proven he's willing to lie. Who knows what he'll do next? Carol took her hand across the table. I want to protect you, Brittany, and our baby. This ensures that no matter what happens, you're taken care of. It was a masterful lie, and Carol delivered it with the sincerity of a man who believed every word. Brittany wanted to believe it too. He could see the hope in her eyes, the desperate desire for this to be real. What would the post-nup say? That we keep our finances separate. Your business remains yours. My inheritance remains mine. In the unlikely event of divorce, we each walk away with what we brought to the marriage. Fair and simple. That seems one-sided. Your inheritance is worth millions. And your business is worth millions too, potentially. You've been working so hard to build it. Carol squeezed her hand. This just protects us both. If you're uncomfortable, we don't have to do it. But I thought it made sense given Sean's accusations. Brittany was quiet, and Carol could almost hear her mind working through the angles. If she refused, it would look suspicious. If she agreed, she'd be signing away her claim to the inheritance. But Sean had panicked, had told her to deny everything and act normal. Okay, she finally said. If it makes you feel better, I'll sign it. Thank you. Carol raised his wine glass. To protecting our family. They clinked glasses. Brittany drank deeply. She didn't notice that Carol barely touched his wine. Over dinner, she tried to act normal, but Carol could see the cracks. The forced laughter. The way her hand kept returning to her stomach in an unconscious tell. The glances at her phone, probably waiting for Sean to tell her what to do next. "How's the baby?" Carol asked. "Any morning sickness yet?" "A little. Nothing too bad." The lie came easily now. She'd been practicing. "We should schedule an ultrasound. I want to see the baby. Maybe find out if it's a boy or girl." "It's too early for that. Just to hear the heartbeat, then." "I read that you can hear it as early as 6 weeks." Carol smiled at her. "I'll come with you to your next appointment. I want to be involved in everything." The panic in her eyes was delicious. "You don't have to do that. I know you're busy with work. I'll make time. For our baby? Of course I'll make time." Carol reached across the table and placed his hand on hers. "We're in this together, right?" "Right," Brittany whispered. "Together." After dinner, she excused herself to take a bath. As soon as the bathroom door closed, Tyler's voice came through Carol's earpiece. "She's texting Sean. Wants to meet tomorrow. Says the situation is worse than we thought." "Good," Carol murmured. "Let them scramble." The next morning, Carol presented Brittany with the post-nuptial agreement. It was 10 pages of legal language that boiled down to one thing. In the event of divorce, they each left with what they'd entered the marriage with, plus anything they'd earned independently during the marriage. It was ironclad, drafted by Felix Lambert's firm, and completely enforceable. "This seems really formal," Brittany said, flipping through the pages. "It's just a precaution. Sign it or don't. I love you either way." Carol kissed her forehead. "But it would give me peace of mind." She signed it. Her hand shook slightly, but she signed every page, initialed every clause. Carol had Felix Lambert as a witness via video call, making it completely legal. "There," Brittany said, setting down the pen. "Feel better?" "Much better. Thank you." Carol collected the papers. "I have to go meet with Felix about some other inheritance stuff. Will you be okay here?" "I'm actually going to meet Connie for lunch." Girl talk. Connie Mueller was Brittany's best friend since college. Carol knew for a fact that Brittany was actually meeting Sean at a hotel in Riverside, the same hotel from the photographs. Tyler had been tracking their communications. "Have fun," Carol said, kissing her cheek. "Love you." "Love you too," she replied, and the words were hollow as a drum. Carol drove to Felix Lambert's office, but not to discuss the inheritance. He would have finalized phase 3 of his plan. "The post-nup is solid," Felix confirmed, reviewing the signed document. "She can't contest the inheritance in divorce proceedings now. But you know this will only protect your assets, right? It won't stop them from trying something else." "I know," Carol said. "That's why I need your help with something more creative. I want to file a complaint with the California Medical Board about a doctor who's been falsifying pregnancy records." Felix raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening. I've documented every lie Brittany's told about her pregnancy, every fake symptom, every made-up doctor's appointment. I want to file a complaint claiming that a doctor has been helping her fake medical records for personal gain, insurance fraud perhaps. The investigation will reveal that there is no doctor, that she's been lying about everything. That's devious. She's faking a pregnancy to manipulate me. I think devious is appropriate. The medical board takes fraud seriously. If they investigate and find she's been lying, it becomes part of the public record." "Exactly. And once it's public, I file for divorce on grounds of fraud. The post-nup protects my assets, and her reputation is destroyed." Carol leaned forward. "But I need one more thing. I need proof of the affair that's admissible in court. Tyler's surveillance recordings won't work. California is a 2-party consent state for recordings. You can record conversations you're part of, but recording Brittany and Sean without their knowledge is illegal. I'm not planning to use those recordings in court. I'm planning to use them for leverage." Carol pulled out his phone and showed Felix a series of photos. Tyler managed to get these from the hotel security cameras. Public space, no expectation of privacy. Brittany and Sean entering a hotel room together, multiple dates and times. That'll work for proving adultery in divorce proceedings. And there's one more thing. I want to offer them a deal. Felix sat back. "What kind of deal?" "I want them both to sign confessions. Full admissions of the affair, the plan to defraud me, everything. In exchange, I won't go to the police about the Meridian situation or file fraud charges. They'll never agree to that. They will if they think it's their only way out. Carol smiled. Because the alternative is prison. Chapter 8. The Trap Closes. Carol's plan came together like a symphony reaching its crescendo. Each piece moved into place with precision, and he conducted it all with the calm of a man who'd already seen the ending. 3 days after Brittany signed the post-nup, Carol scheduled a doctor's appointment for them both. He told her it was just a routine checkup, something his health insurance offered for expecting parents. She tried to refuse, but he was insistent, loving, excited to see their baby on ultrasound. I don't think we need to, Brittany said the night before the appointment, her voice tight with barely concealed panic. Please? For me. Carol took her hands. I want to be involved in this. I want to be a good father. She couldn't refuse without raising suspicion. So she agreed, probably hoping she could fake her way through it somehow, or maybe planning to cause a scene and claim the stress made her miscarry. The appointment was at 10 a.m. Carol drove them to the medical building, chatting casually about baby names and nursery colors. Brittany's responses were monosyllabic, her hands clenched in her lap. They checked in at the OB/GYN office. The receptionist asked for Brittany's insurance information and previous medical records. Brittany fumbled through her purse, claiming she forgot the documents at home. That's okay, the nurse said kindly. We can look you up in the system. You said your primary care doctor referred you. Actually, Carol said, this is our first appointment. We wanted a fresh start with a new doctor. The examination room was small and clinical. Brittany sat on the paper-covered table, her face pale. The doctor, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chun, came in with a warm smile and a tablet. So, first prenatal visit. How exciting. How far along are you? About 6 weeks, Brittany said quietly. And you confirmed the pregnancy with a home test? Yes. Multiple tests. Great. Let's do an ultrasound and see if we can hear that heartbeat. Dr. Chun set up the machine, squeezing gel onto Brittany's exposed stomach. This might be a little cold. Carol watched Brittany's face as the doctor moved the ultrasound wand across her abdomen. Watched her eyes fill with tears. Watched her hand grip the table edge until her knuckles went white. The monitor showed nothing. No fetus. No heartbeat. Just the normal anatomy of a non-pregnant woman. Dr. Chen's smile faded. She checked again, adjusting the wand, looking from different angles. I'm not seeing anything here. Sometimes it's too early, or the dates are off. Let me check your HCG levels with a blood test. I don't need a blood test, Brittany said suddenly. I think I might have miscarried. The room went silent. Dr. Chun set down the wand. When did this happen? Last night. I was bleeding. I didn't want to worry Carol. Brittany was crying now, and they looked like real tears. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Carol played his part perfectly. Shock. Grief. He pulled Brittany into his arms as she sobbed against his chest. Why didn't you tell me? We could have come to the hospital. I didn't want to believe it was happening, Brittany cried. I'm sorry. Dr. Chun was professional and compassionate. She explained miscarriage statistics, offered counseling resources, suggested a follow-up appointment. Through it all, Carol held his wife and said the right things, while inside, his mind was 3 steps ahead, already moving to the next phase. They drove home in silence. Brittany stared out the window, tears streaming down her face. Whether from relief or genuine emotion, Carol couldn't tell and didn't care. We'll try again, he said, parking in their driveway. When you're ready. We have time. I need to be alone for a while, Brittany said, her voice hollow. I'm going to stay with Connie for a few days. Of course. Whatever you need. Carol watched her go inside, watched her pack a bag with shaking hands, watched her drive away in her Lexus. As soon as she was gone, he called Donna. She's running, he said. She'll go to Sean. Follow her. Already on it, Donna replied. She just pulled into the Riverside Hotel parking garage. Sean's car is already here. Perfect. Execute Phase 4. An hour later, 2 detectives from the Rosewood Police Department knocked on Carol's door. He invited them in, offered coffee, played the concerned husband perfectly. We received a complaint about insurance fraud, Detective Morris Morgan said, specifically about falsified pregnancy records. Your wife's name came up in the investigation. My wife? That's impossible. She just miscarried today. Carol showed them the discharge papers from Dr. Chen's office. It's been devastating. Detective Morgan exchanged a glance with his partner, Detective Edgar Woodward. Mr. Anderson, according to the blood test Dr. Chen ran, your wife has never been pregnant. Her HCG levels are 0. She's not miscarrying. She was never carrying a child in the first place. Carol let the shock show on his face. Let the realization dawn slowly. What are you saying? We're saying your wife has been lying to you. And if she's filed any insurance claims or received any financial benefit from this fake pregnancy, that's fraud. I don't understand. Why would she do this? That's what we'd like to know. Detective Woodward pulled out a notepad. Has your wife come into any significant money recently? Any life insurance policies? Any financial agreements that would benefit her if you believed she was pregnant? I inherited some money recently. We signed a post-nuptial agreement to protect both our assets. Carol's voice shook, not with emotion, but with the effort of containing his satisfaction. She knew about the inheritance before she told me about the pregnancy. The detectives took notes, asked more questions, told him they need to speak with Brittany. Carol gave them her phone number and told them she was staying with a friend, gave them Connie's address, even though he knew she was at a hotel with Sean. After the detectives left, Carol made one more call. Felix, it's time. Send them the offer. The offer arrived at the Riverside Hotel via courier at 8 p.m. Carol knew because Tyler was still monitoring everything. The package contained 2 identical documents, full confessions of the affair, the plot to defraud Carol, and every detail of their scheme. At the bottom of each was a signature line and a simple note. Sign these, and I won't press charges. Refuse, and I'll make sure you both go to prison. You have 24 hours to decide. Carol. Tyler patched through their phone conversation that night. He's bluffing, Sean said. He can't prove fraud. The pregnancy thing is her word against doctors. There are no doctors, Sean. I never saw a doctor. I bought fake test results online. Brittany's voice was hysterical. And he has those recordings from your meeting with him. You confessed to everything. Those recordings aren't admissible in court, but they can ruin us. If he leaks them, if anyone sees them, we're done. My business is already failing. If clients find out I'm a fraud, I'll never work again. So what do you want to do? Sign his confession and admit to everything. I want to disappear. I want to go somewhere he can't find us. With what money? You're broke, and I'm leveraged up to my eyeballs in that Meridian deal. If the FBI investigates, I'm fucked. They argued for another 20 minutes. Finally, Brittany broke. I'm signing it. I can't go to jail, Sean. I can't. You signed that, you're admitting to fraud. He'll use it against you in divorce court. If I don't sign it, I'll go to prison. At least if I sign, I'll walk away free. A pause. I'm done. I'm signing it, and I'm leaving California. You do whatever you want. Carol listened to his father try to convince his wife not to confess, listened to the desperation in both their voices, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. The confessions arrived at Felix Lambert's office the next morning, both signed and notarized. Brittany had signed hers at 3 a.m. Sean had held out until 7 a.m., but eventually caved. Carol read them in Felix's office, the physical proof of their betrayal in black and white. I, Brittany Hagen Anderson, confess that I entered into a marriage with Carol Anderson with the intent to defraud him. I, Sean Robert Bishop, confess that I conspired with Brittany Anderson to defraud my biological son. Every detail was there. The plan, the fake pregnancy, the affair, all of it documented and signed. What happens now? Felix asked. Now. Carol folded the confessions carefully. Now I file for divorce, with these confessions as evidence of adultery and fraud. The postnup protects my assets. They both leave with nothing. And the criminal charges? I keep my word. No charges, no police involvement. They signed the confessions. That's punishment enough. They admitted to the world what they really are. That's more mercy than they deserve. Mercy, Carol smiled. Felix, I'm not being merciful. I'm being strategic. If I send them to prison, they become victims. This way, they just become cautionary tales. Sean loses his reputation, his business relationships. Brittany becomes known as the woman who faked a pregnancy to steal money. They'll never recover from this. Scorched earth, Felix murmured. Exactly. Chapter 9, New Foundations. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Thanks to the post-nuptial agreement and Brittany's signed confession, the proceedings were swift and decidedly one-sided. Brittany left the marriage with exactly what she'd brought to it: debt, a failing business, and a reputation in tatters. The confession had leaked. Carol never asked Tyler how, but suddenly copies were making the rounds in Rosewood's business circles. Brittany's marketing firm lost every client within a month. She declared bankruptcy and moved to Arizona, where Carol heard she was working retail under her maiden name. Sean's fate was more dramatic. The confession revealed his involvement with Meridian Pharmaceuticals, which prompted an FBI investigation into the Medicare fraud case. While Carol kept his word and didn't file charges, the FBI didn't need his help once they started digging. Sean was indicted 6 months after signing the confession. His trial made headlines. Bishop's Strategic Solutions collapsed. His reputation in business circles was destroyed. The jury found him guilty on 8 counts of fraud, and he was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Carol attended the sentencing. He sat in the back of the courtroom and watched his biological father be led away in handcuffs. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Carol saw what he'd expected to see. Rage, yes, but also something deeper. Defeat. The recognition that he'd underestimated his son, and that error had cost him everything. Carol felt nothing watching him go. No satisfaction, no vindication. Just the cold certainty that justice had been served. 6 months after the divorce, Carol stood in the offices of Adams Consulting Group, his late mother's company, now his. He'd restructured it, brought in new management, expanded into markets Geraldine had never explored. The company was thriving under his leadership, growing beyond even Geraldine's ambitions. Mr. Anderson, his assistant, Jenny Martin, poked her head into his office. Your 3 o'clock is here. Send her in. Donna Carpenter entered with her usual no-nonsense efficiency. She'd become more than just an investigator. She was now head of security for Adams Consulting Group, using her skills to protect the company and its interests. Quarterly security report, she said, dropping a folder on his desk. No threats, no attempts at corporate espionage. We're clean. Good. Carol reviewed the report briefly. How are the new surveillance protocols working? Like a charm. Nobody's getting in or out with company secrets on my watch. Donna paused. You know, Geraldine would be proud of what you've done here. You've honored her legacy. I'm trying to. More than trying. You've succeeded. Donna stood to leave, then turned back. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. With Brittany and Sean. Some people think you went too far, but I disagree. They made their choices. You just made sure they faced the consequences. After she left, Carol turned his chair to look out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city below. Rosewood spread out in the afternoon sunlight. The same city where a month ago he'd paid $40 for a stranger's groceries and set in motion a chain of events that had revealed the truth about his life. His phone buzzed. Tyler, beers tonight? Celebrating your 1-year anniversary of freedom. Carol smiled and typed back. Absolutely. 7 p.m. at Murphy's? It's a date. Proud of you, man. You survived the worst and came out stronger. That night, Carol sat across from Tyler at Murphy's pub, a beer in hand, and realized that Tyler was right. He had survived. More than that, he'd won. You ever regret it? Tyler asked. Going after them the way you did? Carol considered the question. Did he regret destroying his wife's life? Sending his father to prison? Taking everything from the 2 people who'd tried to take everything from him? No, he said finally. They made a choice to betray me. To use me. They thought I was weak, that I'd never figure it out, that even if I did, I'd be too damaged to fight back. They were wrong. You're a hard man to fool now. I learned from the best. Carol raised his glass. To Geraldine Adams, the mother I never knew, who loved me enough to give me the truth. They drank to that. As the evening wore on and the conversation turned to lighter topics, Carol found himself thinking about the future. The inheritance had given him wealth and power, Yes, but more importantly, it had given him clarity. He knew who he was now. Not Robert and Patricia Anderson's distant son, not Sean Bishop's abandoned mistake, but Geraldine Adams' legacy. A week later, Carol sat in Felix Lambert's office for what he hoped would be their last major legal meeting for a while. "I want to establish a foundation," Carol said. "The Geraldine Adams Foundation. It'll provide support for single mothers, especially young women who are considering giving their children up for adoption." Felix's eyes softened. She would have loved that. "I'm also setting up scholarships for kids in foster care and adoption programs. Make sure they have the opportunities one had, but with more support and less." Carol paused, searching for the word. "Isolation," Felix offered gently. "Exactly." They worked out the details, funding levels, board structure, grant criteria. Carol would personally oversee the foundation's operations, at least for the first few years. "You're doing something good here," Felix said as they finalized the paperwork. "Turning your pain into purpose. That's rare." Geraldine did the same thing. She built a company out of her regret and love. "I'm just following her example." As Carol left Felix's office that afternoon, he passed a young woman in the lobby, struggling with a stroller and an armful of papers. He held the door for her, and she smiled gratefully. "Thank you," she said. "You're very kind." Carol smiled back. "My mother taught me well." It wasn't a lie. Geraldine had taught him, even from a distance. She'd taught him that love could survive separation, that kindness was worth $40 and so much more, and that sometimes the truth was the most valuable inheritance of all. 6 months later, the Geraldine Adams Foundation opened its doors. The first grant went to a 17-year-old girl facing an unplanned pregnancy, terrified and alone. Carol met with her personally, offered her resources, counseling, and choices, whatever she needed to make the decision that was right for her. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, tears in her eyes. "You don't even know me." "Because someone should have done this for my mother," Carol said. "And because everyone deserves kindness when they need it most." Standing in the foundation's office, surrounded by staff members dedicated to helping others, Carol Anderson realized something profound. Brittany and Sean had tried to take everything from him, but in the end, they'd given him something invaluable. They'd forced him to become the man Geraldine had hoped he'd be: strong, decisive, uncompromising in his values.